Many of these discussions with the squirrels are real noisy this time of year, so they just kind of go to this and I snap their eyes, say the same thing back to them. And
Oh, yeah. I've got all kinds of birds. This is bird season.
down at Bush Park down in Salem, the grays and the reds interbreeded enough they have a whole different subspecies of squirrel they study. It looks kind of like a marmot or something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I love those little legless squirrels, as you can imagine.
Remember, just speaking to the mics, don't turn them off. I don't have them out here.
Oh, do I have to come out here and tell ya?
No, sometimes.
Okay. I wouldn't know how to turn them off. Is that on?
Yeah, it's on. Sometimes they automatically go off when you're not talking.
Oh.
Turns them off. I don't realize it until you speak and I hear nothing. But this group wasn't very good about talking to the mic. It's just hard to hear it when you're later on in the year.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure.
Not sure which is.
Hello, Richard. I'm good.
Doing good.
Doing good. Doing good.
Sit between you guys. I don't know if this is a good
Well, is that your name?
I don't. Is it?
That's you.
Does I have to do it?
I'm me. Are you you?
I definitely am me.
Good. That's good. We're all us then.
Well, we'll wait 5 minutes for our chair.
Okay.
Well, we can probably wait. And if he doesn't come in 5 minutes, just call the meeting to order and then say there's a presentation.
I can do that. I can ad lib.
As vice.
Yeah. Don't you love it? Thank you, Richard.
No, we don't have any minutes.
Well, that's easy.
You know, we will have some.
Okay. Well, let's go to the top then. So how are you?
Pretty good. How are you? Yeah.
I am here.
Yeah. Well, that's the key thing. Be alive.
It's the start, the breathing in and out part, yeah.
Beats the alternative.
Yeah.
For some reason on your screen, I think the presentation doesn't show up, but it is on the agenda, so I'll correct that.
Oh, this is nice. Goals and priorities.
Oh, I'm talking about this computer system. The agenda that they're looking at doesn't have a line for the presentation, but because of the...
But they'll see that.
They'll see that, yeah.
No, that's Betty Munn.
Mom,
Rocky Smith.
We're waiting for our Brian.
I don't know her.
Yeah, I met her once. Actually, I met her on the street when she was campaigning. Yeah, and then Kathy Ross.
Nice. Here we are.
Land of
Did
Opportunity.
you know you were here? Did you
The
know
Land
that's
of
where you were?
Opportunity. Yeah, apparently I see that on the news every day. The Land of Opportunity, huh?
So I heard the Cove project fell through. Is that true?
That's when I got a call from Jerry. Jerry,
It says finalize a...
yeah.
And-
Well, I guess they did, apparently. Literally, from what I understand. I don't, I saw the, somebody, did you send me that letter on the Cove, Clackamas Cove?
I don't think it was me.
Well, somebody sent me the letter. The Clackamas Cove letter.
I thought that was from the city. Was it? I think it was a letter from the
Eric
mayor.
Underwood?
No, it was from Dave Frazier.
Oh.
But I'm not sure how we got the letter, or how I got it. I can't remember the
You can
email.
get a copy of it, so I'm out
Maybe,
of the loop.
maybe Brian
So
sent it.
what's the
Did he send
story?
it?
Is the Cove gone now?
Yeah, they have a overarching master plan that's still valid, but the detailed development plans have expired, so they would need to resubmit those. So
There's...
What else, Mark?
well, we're at 7:05, almost. One more minute.
Yeah, Brian was going to be here.
Yeah, that's what he said. Did indicate that he'd be here, so.
Pete, you didn't send the letter around on the cove?
I didn't get the letter.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure what it said other than.
Well, actually, I guess I
yeah.
could look at my phone when I think of it. Probably on there. Still. Maybe.
All right, Shaw, we may as well kick it off.
Do I have to bang the thing?
You don't have to. You can just say you call the meeting to order and then go right into a presentation.
Okay. Should I begin? Okay. I'd like to officially call the meeting of the Natural Resources Committee to order. The first item on the agenda is a presentation of the Stormwater NPDES permit. So we're yours.
And if you can't see the presentation, flip your little silver toggle over here. So you can see every guys. There you go.
There we go.
Well, good evening, and thank you for taking the time to have us and host us here. We thought it would be a good idea to share with you this presentation. We've given it before. Christopher Reininger was with Brown and Caldwell, and Gail Johnson's staff. She's our water quality coordinator. So this presentation's been provided to the City Commission maybe a couple of years ago. It's been updated, obviously, but we're really trying to share with you what some of the requirements are of our NPDES permit. It was signed in 2011, so we're about the second year of implementation, and we've got lots of work yet to do. This permit is a 5-year permit. This permit is covers all of Oregon City, and we're one co-permittee of several in Clackamas County. I want to say 13? 13 in Clackamas County, so we're one under that permit. But this go-around, DEQ has been a lot more specific about the individual agencies, and our permit is, each city within the Clackamas County jurisdiction has their own permit. So DEQ looks at us as kind of all under one umbrella permit, but yet we're different as well. If you think about stormwater, the city has some influence over stormwater quality, but a lot of the stormwater that crosses private property is something that we don't have a lot of regulatory authority on. But yet this permit kind of forces our hand with that to a fair degree to work hard through public education, through development, approval, through erosion control, to do the best job that the city can to improve water quality as it reaches those pipes. Once it gets in those pipes, then it becomes our authority to manage and maintain. And so we'll talk a little bit about this. Krista was asking how much knowledge this group had, and I think it's a pretty informed group when it comes to stormwater. I'm not certain of that, but I think you are. Definitely interested in it. So there might be some terms and things that maybe you haven't heard, but we'll work through those. And the other thing that I think is important to get out of this presentation is a lot of those requirements that were included in the permit were additions. It's typical of regulation. They add new requirements that we don't, not necessarily eliminating the old things that we had to do. They've just kind of piled on more requirements. And so some of this presentation takes a kind of a snapshot of where we think that's going to affect us with regard to staffing or resources. And not specifics and numbers, but we're just kind of giving you an indication of where we see differences from what we have in resources today and what we think we're going to need down the road. The other thing is we'd like to take this a similar presentation to the City Commission in a work session with them, and I staff the Transportation Advisory Committee, and often when things come straight to the City Commission without going through the advisory committees, we hear about that, and the preference would be that we would have provided that information to the committee that it makes most sense to do that for, and that we get comments and feedback from you in terms of, we're not asking for any decisions tonight, but we'd just like to hear from you and figure out if this is an area of interest, if maybe we need to kind of look at something a little differently. Obviously, these are given requirements that we're kind of in the queue to finish up. So we're not looking for specific direction for change, but we're looking for some buy-in and some review, because we've never presented for this group before, and it seems like a good group to kind of hear this information. So, Krista, you
Okay.
wanna-
I have a list of acronyms here, but hopefully I'll describe what they are as I go through them. So the way we set up the presentation is to recap what the permit requirements are so you understand the history and how we got to where we are now. And then I'll talk about the new requirements in the permit and also the additional resources that will require to comply. So just as background, in the early 1990s, cities with 100,000 in population or more were required to get what was called a Phase 1 NPDES, which is National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit for runoff from their municipal separate storm sewer systems. So in Oregon, there were 6 permits that were issued for these 6 areas, but it represented 33 jurisdictions, and the bulk of the jurisdictions were in the Clackamas County permit, which John mentioned has 13 applicants. So from 1990 to 1993, we spent a lot of time on these large applications for the permits, and then the permits were issued in 1995, and they're 5-year permits, as John mentioned. And then Phase 2 permits were issued later in 2007 for smaller communities. Those were more like the 10 to 50,000 communities. So the urban areas covered in Portland include those that are sort of highlighted on that map. So the main element of the permit is a stormwater management plan. We call them SWAMPs. And we are required to create a stormwater management plan for our cities, and they are required to include specific categories of practices, and I'm going to go through each one of those categories. And within those categories, you develop these BMPs, or best management practices. There's no numerical discharge limits. It doesn't say what the pollutant concentrations have to be in your runoff once it gets to the creek, but the requirement is that you reduce pollutants to the maximum extent practicable. So that's the standard that we're trying to reach, which is very gray how you decide what that is. In addition to the stormwater management plan, monitoring is required, so collecting samples and finding out what the levels of pollutants are in those samples. So Oregon City's history, we had a permit from 1995 to 2000, so it was the first time after we developed our stormwater management plans that we implemented them, and we implemented the monitoring plan. And DEQ is very big on this adaptive management, so constantly trying to improve what we're doing and making it better. There was kind of a gap between 2000 and 2004. We submitted to get our permits renewed, and there was some threat of litigation going on from environmental groups that there should be more numerical discharge limits in the permits. And the permits were then reissued in 2004 for that 5-year period. The new period, we had to do a few updates to our stormwater management plans and monitoring plans. And the main new requirement, which was kind of the compromise on the litigation, was that we had to start kind of quantifying what our pollutant load reduction is. And we didn't have limits, but we have some benchmarks that we have to strive to meet in reducing pollutant loads. So that permit expired 2009, and again, we had like 3 years of permit negotiations because DEQ wanted to add a lot more this time around too, so we had a lot of negotiations. And our permit was issued in 2012, so just last March.
Well, I thought it was earlier than that.
Well, it was, most of the permits were issued in 2011, and Clackamas County appealed an issue in the permit, and so ours was delayed for a year. So the categories that are in the stormwater management plans are listed here, and I'm going to go through each one of them. But there were, it's basically illicit discharge elimination, industrial programs for construction, and we had 4 new elements, which was pretty hefty for us to have, and I'm going to go through each one of those. So the first requirement is that we have a program to address illicit discharges. We are supposed to look for them, detect them, and eliminate them. So the way I'm going through each of these categories, and the way each slide is set up is I'm describing our existing program is basically what we did up to this permit, and then I listed new additional requirements. The bottom has a due date for those new additional requirements. And then in the bottom right corner, we kind of did the consumer reports thing of how is this going to impact, how are the new additional requirements going to impact us in terms of dollars, staff, CIP, and training. So each slide is kind of set up the same way. But the illicit discharges program, we have been inspecting outfalls during dry weather and trying to investigate if there are discharges, where they're coming from, and respond to public complaints. They added some new requirements to be more specific about how we have enforcement on that program. We have to document our standard procedures for doing that. We can't just go out and do it. We have to have a standard operating procedures manual. We have to have action levels that once we see a certain level of pollutant that we follow it upstream and track it. So it was just kind of making it more stringent, a little bit more of a stringent program, or more stringent in terms of documentation. And then we have to have maps of all the outfalls so that if you find a discharge, you're able to look at a map and try and track it upstream. So that actually was due right away at the beginning of the permit, and we've completed that for Oregon City.
The dots you'll see, I think white represents low, gray is medium, and
black is high. So it's just kind of a low, medium, high. Sorry, I should have said that. This category is industrial and commercial facilities, and this was a big addition. We normally just had a program to respond to customer complaints, but now we have to have a program to go out really and inspect some of these facilities. And it's pretty flexible. We're supposed to figure out which facilities we think could be a concern and add those to our inspection program. Again, develop kind of a standard operating procedures and then implement the program. That's due this July, our write-up of our proposed program.
Yeah, so since it's complaint driven now, if we get a complaint, we'll go out and look at it. It might be one of our stormwater staff or our water quality staff that'll deal with that. And the process has been, this looks like a problem. We need to work with that property owner or business owner to change that practice. This is more robust in that, that they've suggested more, routine inspections, maybe not annually, but pretty regularly. So that's definitely one of those staffing issues where, we got to have somebody to do that, or we, pay a consultant to do that. So
if you have a thing where you have a new requirement, but it's planned and unfunded, can the requirement basically require the city to provide? I understand this, maximum is not practical, but how do you actually implement this if you're not going to allocate money for it?
I think DEQ is silent on the funding piece. It's like a lot of regulation that happens. Often the city is faced with new regulation, and the expectation is that you find a way to manage that regulation or comply with that regulation. That's no different here. So we haven't seen any. Again, DEQ is relatively silent on the funding. I think what they see is that, first of all, if you don't have a utility fee, a stormwater utility fee, the expectation is you will probably need one. And then if that stormwater utility fee is not adequate, then the expectation is you would increase that stormwater utility fee to make it adequate to fund, to become compliant with the requirements.
What happens if the city wouldn't get into compliance by allocating the money to do the business inspections?
I mean, there's enforcement, there's penalties in the permit, criminal penalties. So there are, I mean, if you don't comply.
Consequences.
Yeah, fines, big fines that are applied on a daily basis.
So it probably makes more sense to allocate the funding.
Yes.
Yeah. I can't remember who they actually named, but I think they actually. I'm trying to remember if I'm
It
actually
comes
named
down
on
to
that.
a
but
person.
Yeah, it's
Negligence, yeah.
Yeah. So that gets a little uncomfortable. Thanks for asking.
We'll visit you.
So to ask the question, the fine would come to the city then, and through a specific person? Is that what you're meaning, John? Or?
Well, yeah, I think there's a signature line on our annual report, and I think it requires the city manager and myself to sign, right? I think it's you. It's me, yeah, yet again. It's got some discomfort to it.
I mean, they can impose civil penalties up to $10,000 per day for violation of a term. So it could be subject to federal civil penalty not to exceed $32,000 per day for each violation. Punishable by a fine up to $25,000 or imprisonment for not more than 1 year or both for a person who causes criminal negligence who would be in charge.
And when the city's developing their budget for this area, they're aware of not funding the consequences. And
Yeah, I mean,
Hopefully.
that's interesting. We're doing a 2-year budget right now, and we're not showing additions in staffing. We're not showing additions in revenue. So we may be up for budget amendments as we move through this process. But that's like I said, we find, efficiencies within our existing program that help cover some of these. So, I mean, some of these requirements have some. Like this one here, you said there's some latitude in how we
There's
go
some
about doing.
flexibility, yeah.
We may choose to do our inspections on a 3 to 5 year cycle or those kind of things. But yeah, I think in total you're going to see this is a lot to ask of Oregon City.
interns.
Yeah, creative, volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
Are you up for that?
I think there's a theme, too, with a lot of the new requirements, and EPA is paying attention to this, too, and writing new rules as we speak for the next round. But they felt like our MEP, our maximum extent practicable, was a little bit soft, and so they have been really pushing for us to have in our stormwater management plans things that allow them to enforce the permit. So we can't just say, we'll street sweep when we need to. We have to say, we are going to go out and street sweep 3 times a year, and then that is a potential way they can catch us of being out of compliance. So this permit round, when we redid our stormwater management plans, they were very focused on making them more enforceable. And they're really trying to nail down a lot more details. They have been a little more wiggly in the past, I would say, or flexible. Actually, this one is not a big change. This is basically the erosion control program, so managing runoff from construction sites. And Oregon City has an erosion control program for developments greater than 1,000 square feet. They review and approve plans and conduct inspections and enforcement. Basically, the one new requirement is that in addition to looking at sediment, that we're looking at other construction site materials that could be a problem with pollution as well. So piled up bags of concrete that are leaking into the storm sewer system.
Well, this one's not, a big change for bedroom communities or residential communities that don't have a lot of industry. This is a focus area for them. They're pretty interested in this program, and they think that this is where a lot of improvement in water quality can happen.
Education and outreach is also a requirement of the permit, and we've had kind of a varied program with a lot of different things going on. Oregon City participates on the last check mark there in a regional coalition for clean rivers, so it's an efficient way to have a regional education program that Oregon City participates in. I'm sure you have brochures at your desk, and outreach. There's training on pest management, training on spill response for internal employees, education for construction site operators. There's catch basin stenciling programs where you go out and put markers at your catch basins that those drain to streams, so no dumping should happen there. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and even with this, they added one, they want us to conduct an education survey to quantify changes in behavior as a result of our education programs, which is not an easy task. So there again, we're trying to get involved with a regional study that's happening through Aqua, where we can pay in and it'll be much more efficient to do it on a regional basis. We have to show that we provide training to municipal. The permit says to all municipal employees that have any involvement with MS4 related activities. So there is a new emphasis on additional training. And provide education regarding maintenance of private water quality facilities. Those are required for new development. They enhance there's a public involvement and participation element. We've always had to put our stormwater management plans out for public review. Now they're asking us to also put our monitoring plan out for review and our annual reports out for public review on the web as we submit them.
We've done that, at least the annual reports. I don't know that we've, our monitoring plan has been on the web as well. You don't get a lot of hits on that, so we expect you all to read that document and give us some comments, those documents. Post-construction
site runoff. So this is stormwater quality standards for new development. So as a new development comes in, you're requiring them to design their drainage on site to address water quality. So that's already required in the city, and plan reviews happen and site inspections happen. This was a big part of the permit negotiations, and this is a big part of what EPA is looking at right now is more than just providing treatment is the kind of treatment that we're providing, and there's a new emphasis on green infrastructure using rain gardens and swales and green roofs and pervious pavement and much more green types of facilities that infiltrate water into the ground instead of causing it to run off into the streams. So there's a new emphasis on that you're now required to prioritize that when you ask development to address water quality. There's another issue, and I'm going to talk about it a little later too, where they're focusing on runoff volumes. They're finding that just the sheer volume of runoff is eroding streams and causing a problem also. So before, where we just had to treat runoff and basically filter pollutants, now we slow it down for flood control. Now we really have to reduce runoff volumes, and those low impact development practices or green infrastructure help to do that. So that's a big emphasis. And we have black dots there just because that will require updating your design standards, which could implicate code changes and making a new design manual for developers. Pollution prevention for municipal operations. This is pipe cleaning, catch basin cleaning, street sweeping, and cross-connection abatement, all of which the city has been doing throughout their other two permits. New requirements are focused on having a program to control pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. There's a focus on controlling the release of materials from firefighting and training and activities, and also looking at your own municipal facilities if you have like a maintenance yard, and making sure that you're really dealing with runoff from those sites as well. So those are pretty hefty new requirements too. And those are due this July. Structural stormwater control operation and maintenance activities. So the previous slide was focused on sort of the streets and catch basins. This is more, you have some public water quality facilities out there, and you have been inspecting and cleaning and maintaining those. Now this is adding a new focus on, when you ask a developer to build a facility, are we inspecting, cleaning, and maintaining those, or making sure that that's happening? Because That's a big issue with DEQ as well, is that we've been asking developers to build all these facilities, and then you go back 3 years later and somebody's filled them in or nobody's paying attention. So there's a big emphasis now on ensuring maintenance. So we have to inventory and map all those facilities, make sure that there's an inspection program, maintenance agreements with the developers that are supposed to do maintenance themselves, and an enforcement program. So the monitoring and reporting, we have been doing monitoring over the years, and we do a comprehensive monitoring program with Clackamas County. So all the cities in the permit contribute to this monitoring program, and we do some in-stream sampling and outfall sampling. In the outfall sampling, we look at runoff from different land uses, residential, commercial, industrial, see how things vary. The new requirements are, because they're interested in flows, focusing on flows. But the two big ones are now we have to look at pesticides, which we didn't have to look at before, and that's pretty expensive. So USGS is going to do this for us, and we're all going to participate and have them, because it's more efficient and cheaper, and they'll do a good job and do the data reporting to make some sense out of the data. So we're participating in that. And then the mercury monitoring is also being required because mercury is an issue in the Willamette. And we have to do biological monitoring, which is basically looking at bugs in streams and evaluating the health of the bugs and impacts of stormwater to those aquatic macroinvertebrates. So those are also pretty big new requirements. So outside of our so that's sort of the end of all the categories of our stormwater management plan. In addition, we have these 3 or 4 new elements that are really quite new for us. And what we have to do here is a hydromodification assessment. And as I mentioned, it's now this focus on the sheer increase in volumes that are coming down these creeks. And you can see in this photo, this is the kind of impact that we're seeing. So a lot of communities in Washington and in California, our neighboring communities, are already requiring developers to address this. And it has a bigger impact on developers in some ways. And so we felt when we were negotiating with DEQ that it would be better if we could do an assessment of our creeks first and figure out, is this a problem, and where is it going to be worse from a relative standpoint than other places, because it's very individual to the creek and the soil types in the creek and the flows that you get and how much development you're expecting upstream. So we have to, by the end of the permit term, do a hydromodification assessment, which basically looks at all our creeks and evaluates them for hydromodification impacts and evaluates them for the risk of additional impacts from new development. And then we have to come up with strategies to address it where we see it.
Who in a sense, would this apply to private property owners, or is this applying to public owned
It's really
property?
both.
Okay.
Basically, all the stormwater runoff we have eventually ends up in the creek.
Sure.
And so if we're seeing hydromodification impacts, we have to identify where those are coming from.
Sure.
They could be coming from private development that's already happened, in which case we'd need to go back and retrofit some of the drainage systems. Or we also may have to put in our new development standards, which we're already updating as a part of this permit, that development has to address this by reducing their volumes.
All right.
So it's kind of a mix of whatever strategy we can, or maybe sometimes just stream restoration can be used to address it as well.
This one has, there's lots of implications of how we go about doing this. I mean, this could be a significant amount of work, but there's opportunities for graduate students and education programs to go out and do some of those. You mentioned all our streams. I'm not sure we have to do all our streams, right? The intent is to try to determine what's causing this hydromodification and what the right fixes are in a program to kind of start implementing.
Where is
those.
this?
This isn't in Oregon City. This is.
I don't remember that.
This is not in Oregon City.
I don't know where this
But
is.
I can
have
tell you,
one from each
in
one.
Oregon City, there's a lot of locations where we see this kind of incising of
Yeah, it's
creeks.
happening.
We've got that erosive soil that, it's just.
Out of curiosity, though, understanding right, I mean, when you say hydro modifications, you mean changes in channel configurations, bed configurations that are caused by human activity. I take it is what you mean. What I'm getting at
Yes.
is, I mean, streams are dynamic.
Right.
They're
It's-
not static, so they change on their own too. How do you
It's the-
differentiate one from the other?
It's looking at flows, and a lot of times models are used for this, and flows that would have occurred had we had no development here.
Yes.
And you look at just a typical 2-year type of recurrence storm, and you have, these flows. Then you add all this development in, and that 2-year flow is basically happening all year long. And there's these scientific methods that figure out what the channel forming flow is and how much we've increased it with development, and then trying to ratchet that back down to what it used to be to match sort of the pre-development conditions in the flows. But that is a good point, is that these channels do change, and what they're finding too is that in some areas that got built out, and they're fully built out, if you have a watershed that's fully built out and it's been that way for 15, 20 years, the stream may have stabilized to that or become more stable to that condition. And that's why we want to do these assessments, is we're really looking at where are we actively causing this problem, and where is it going to get a lot worse because we have a lot of new development that we're expecting in the upstream areas.
So I have a question, which is, excuse me, what is the benefit of waiting to apply new standards that are already, new development is going to impact the hydro modification? So it's good to do a study, say, for 2 more years, to determine the impact that's already occurred, but that whatever new is coming in is probably going to add to it. So why would you wait 2 years before you implemented standards that would deal with the issue right now on new development?
Yeah, and I don't think, some of the jurisdictions feel that this is a huge impact to developers. I don't really think it's a huge impact to developers. We have to do a lot of these things anyways. But there is a feeling that it's a big impact, and there was a sense that some of our creeks have already stabilized, and so when you have somebody redevelop in a watershed that's already mostly developed, it's just going to not really even register in terms of flows. Or there may be systems, for example, Gresham was talking about the Columbia Slough, where it's got drainage districts managing flow in that system, so anything we do upstream doesn't really help. So the argument was, give us a couple years to figure out where we should do this and where we don't need to do this, so that we're not impacting developers in areas where it doesn't even make sense. On the other hand, we do have this requirement to update our development standards, and we are required to address the duration of flows and volumes and low impact development, and that's happening even before this is done. So I think there's some stuff that's going to happen already, and there won't be a lot of waiting in terms of new development.
A lot of agencies have these standards. Oregon City's kind of adopted those through, new development that comes in. We'll, ask them to look at LID standards for an agency that's developed those. But I think from our perspective, from specific to Oregon City, it's having a manual and having the training involved in making sure those installed properly, kind of ground truthing some of those measures that were thought to work real well a couple of years ago are not working so well now with regard to maintenance of those facilities. And so there is kind of this careful care in how we move forward with applying those standards. And then there's just, from my perspective, there's a workload that goes along with developing those and adopting those, and then inspecting and maintaining those facilities.
Do you consider this a large effort? It sounds like it's a large effort to do the hydro modification assessment.
I think it can be done in a variety of levels of effort, and we've seen these because these have already been required in California, so there are a lot of examples. of doing full-blown, hydrology, hydraulics models and evaluating things, down to a simpler sort of, Clackamas County has already done a hydromod assessment for 2 of their watersheds, and they basically did a mapping exercise where they look at their streams, they walked their streams and assessed the condition, and then they overlay that with where is new development going to happen, where do we have erosive soils, where do we have high impacting land uses, and they kind of did a red, green, yellow on each of their stream reaches to identify where they see the most risk. So theirs was kind of more of a simple mapping to try and start to hone in on areas that are going to be, that may be impacted. So there's kind of the full range of studies, but yeah, it's not simple.
I was going to say the watershed councils were required to do assessments, and the states allocated a lot of resources to do the watershed assessments. It seems like there might be some duplication of effort, or it seems like to make the best use of the information that's already been collected through the watershed assessments, and not have to reinvent the wheel or redo it if certain organizations have already collected that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not familiar with what those.
Well, most of the watershed, you have to have a watershed assessment in order to get funding from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to support the council activities. So you have very specific requirements of what these assessments contain. And so before conducting a lot of this research, it seems Oregon City has a watershed council already, and just in the other cases, there's a lot of information
Definitely.
out there.
One of the things is to identify data gaps, first of all, and to gather. I know that Fish and Wildlife had done some walking of the creeks for fish standpoint, and while they did that, they were looking at cross sections. So Clackamas did rely on collecting as much information as already out there to start the assessment. It's just a new kind of focus that hasn't been included in previous assessments.
I might just check out what the OWEB watershed assessment requirement and the whole formats are, because they had to do the same thing because they're doing assessments to develop watershed projects. Johnson Creek, they're doing things to reconnect the streams to the floodplains out in the Lentz neighborhood in southeast Portland. So
right. Okay. So I know what you're. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying a lot.
It's for the specific projects that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they're talking stream cross sections, they're talking about flow.
I think a lot of the data from those programs will be helpful.
Sure.
It's just that this assessing the streams for this specific issue related to the duration of erosive flows is something that's new. And we can use a lot of that data to conduct the assessment, but it's a new assessment.
Okay.
If that makes sense, a new focus.
What's the connection then between like this and managing the same streams like for Endangered Species Act? Because obviously you're talking about habitat, you're talking about habitat for rearing and spawning. At the same time, you're talking about the modifications of the channels. So it seems like since the jurisdictions are responsible for responding to the Endangered Species Act listings, that you'd want to integrate the pollution control elements with the fish habitat.
Yeah, I think that it's all.
I think this piece has really yet to kick off, even though there are some agencies that have done some assessments of particular basins. For Oregon City, we have yet to step into this particular requirement. And, I think the work of the watershed groups is going to be great to the degree it applies.
Sure.
Comparatively speaking, I guess, is this kind of gets back to my question a minute ago, I think. Is this a large effort for Oregon City compared to other cities or counties or whatever, given the number of streams? In other words, can you say this is kind of a relatively small effort compared to other cities, which it seems like it would be, depending on the city, I guess? Or can you relate it to number of stream systems, or?
Well, all I know is we've got 15 drainage basins in Oregon City, and they go south, east, west.
Yeah.
So help me out here. If we had to assess every stream, I think that's a large number of drainage basins for a city of our population.
Yeah.
But and I guess I don't know what our, neighbors across the river, West Lynn, have for drainage basins, but I think they're less than that, but they're also
Probably a
smaller
little less.
populations.
Yeah, I
so-
mean, you have cities like Gladstone that just have one creek kind of going through. City of Fairview, same thing. Yeah, you probably have a few more.
You're required to look at all the basins then, all 15, or?
That's what I'm not sure
It's
about.
not, it doesn't specify that. But the intent is that you understand your systems and where the risks are and develop approaches to address it. And so I think that if we came up with some methods where you had some creek systems that were very similar or had similar soils, or that maybe we could, use one as a prototype for another, or come up with ways of reducing the assessment level.
I mean, if you look at Coffee Creek compared to Mud Creek, Coffee Creek is steep and it's a lot of it's basalt. So just topography wise, there's differences in a lot of these creeks, and then soil types, there's differences, and then there's the whole type of development in those different basins. So, I was always under the impression that we probably wouldn't have to do, the work on every one of our streams, but we could categorize them based on different, those similar characteristics. But I don't know. It's been a long time since Krista and I have talked about this one, and I think all the co-permittees under the Clackamas County permit are talking about this one right now and trying to learn from Clackamas County's, the work that they've done already. And there's going to be a short learning curve, but some learning curve associated with that.
Yeah,
And in the meantime, we're still interested in implementing strategies that are going to help, that we know will help the problem. That's still part of our program.
It just sort of hits me that if you've got 15 basins and you're looking at the standards, criteria, or requirements, I guess, here, to collect data and develop strategies that's pretty site-specific, identify strategies to reduce hydromodification. I mean, you got to get fairly specific, I think, on things. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how you develop your methods.
I think it'll be a combination of, in areas where you have new development that might threaten the creek, you're going to have elements in your standards to address that. And then there will be a CIP element of it where you may have to do some stream bank restoration or flow control in upstream areas.
Doesn't it also mean, if I understood it right, you're collecting in-stream information right now at a relatively few sites, and if the big focus here is on magnitude and duration of erosive flows and how that changes, doesn't it mean that you're probably going to have to collect more in-stream data in the future than you are now?
The in-stream data we're collecting now is, more related to concentrations of pollutants, not flows. Well, one thing the city has in their stormwater management plan is that you're going to update your stormwater master plan. And I think that'll really help in terms of estimating flows because you'll do a hydraulic analysis of your storm system, and so you'll be able to see what kind of flows are going into the creeks. And you can use models to look at pre-development conditions and post-development conditions and what the impacts are. So I think, and I'm going to get to another element of this too, is that maybe the master planning process can be a mechanism for pulling a lot of these things together, because you want to look at them in an integrated way anyway. So
We told Pete we'd be done in a half an hour, and actually
half an hour?
20 minutes.
You shouldn't have-
It's
shouldn't have told you
7:47.
that.
So this is your meeting. We're willing to be here. We've got about 7 more slides to get through. So we'll, I guess,
John, I
proceed.
had one question. I think it really kind of applies to this. When I'm looking at kind of cross sections of some of the streams, particularly over near Chapin Park and stuff, it looks like the stream channel has been modified to facilitate quicker storm runoff. Just kind of very neat, very flat on the bottom and stuff. And if you're really talking about quantity being an issue, but yet the city's modified the stream channel in order to facilitate.
Might be part of what's
Well, yeah,
going on.
yeah. I was going to say, because it seems like you're pulling totally opposite directions. Because if you're trying to get the water away as quick as you can have, almost like a drainage ditch. But if you're trying to spread the flow out and facilitate infiltration, that channel's almost exactly designed to do the opposite. So it seems like, does the city have a map of all the places where the channels have been modified to kind of convey stormwater compared to?
I would say we have maps of all our channels. Wouldn't say we've got a good inventory of where they're natural and where they're man-made. But I know the area you're talking about, and almost all of that is been channelized, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can just
Especially on the hilltop up there.
Yeah.
And it's not all been, I just want to clarify, I don't think the city's done all that. A lot of that's been long-standing, whether it
Sure.
be private property owners or over the years, that's.
But it seems like if you're trying to meet these multiple objectives, you might have to modify the way the channel's been modified already to reach these other goals.
Yeah, you're talking stream restoration, and
Yeah.
that CIP, cost goes pretty high on a lot of those. That's not to say it shouldn't be done. I'm just saying, those are projects that are we don't have funding identified for at this time.
So another part of the permit, which is related as well, is retrofits. There was a feeling from the regulators that when we add water quality facilities, we're adding them when areas develop. And so all of our core areas that have been developed for years are underserved. We don't have any treatment there. So they added this to our permit now to start focusing on these underserved areas. So we also have to do a retrofit assessment, which is going to be looking at where do we have facilities now, what do they treat, where do we have gaps. And this can be overlaid with the hydromod assessment too, because if we're putting in a CIP for hydromod, it's a retrofit, and we can take credit for that. So we have to do a retrofit assessment and identify priorities and develop a timeline for starting to construct these retrofits. And we have to initiate construction of one by the end of the permit term. We have to have a plan by July 1st, 2015, and initiate construction a couple of years later of at least one. So,
And I would argue we do these
Yeah.
in almost all of our more recent projects. Do something different with stormwater than what we've done in the past. So the swales, I think a good example of one is Malala and Warner Milne, where we took the runoff, at least part of the runoff from the roadway, put it into what has got some native plantings and kind of a landscaped area. But that'd be a retrofit. Other areas would be much less visible and much simpler.
and I think a lot of transportation projects now are taking advantage of this when you redo a road
Right.
anywhere.
We're talking
putting in
about
green
on
streets.
McLaughlin Boulevard Phase 2, which is on McLaughlin near the Clackamas River and Dunes Drive. We've got provisions in that project to include a retrofit.
I haven't talked about TMDLs, but it's basically in your streams, if you exceed a water quality standard, DEQ develops what's called a TMDL, or a total maximum daily load, and they divide up the load for everyone, and you get a little allocation of what you're allowed to discharge. And so that is what our benchmarks in our permit are geared toward, is trying to reduce pollutant loads until we meet our waste load allocations. And there's been talk that some of these waste load allocations, we can't ever feasibly meet them. And so we'll be out of compliance if we never get there. So DEQ, I think, agrees with some of this. I mean, there's some bacteria standards and things that we just, can't ever get there. So they want us to do a waste load allocation attainment evaluation. So they want us to put together an assessment of what would it take to get there, and how much would that cost, and is it feasible, so that they can start working on. They can basically change these if you can never achieve the beneficial use of the receiving stream. So this is sort of allowing us to plead our case that for some of these standards, bacteria is one of the big ones because they've done some DNA tracking studies to show that maybe only a small portion might be coming from human sources, very small, and the rest is birds and rodents. And while we can do things to help that and have better buffers along our creeks, we can never get it to the standard they want us to without hurting wildlife, basically. So we also had to document an adaptive management process. I think we always do adaptive management. We're always evaluating what we're doing and trying to improve on it. But they wanted us to actually document a process that we go through to adapt our programs over time. We've already submitted that. So even though for some of these the impacts are small, for example, for the illicit discharges, we had the 3 white dots. When you add them all up, it really does start to add up to big implications.
Gail's going to be very busy.
She is. She already is. And I won't go through these in detail, but these were just the compliance dates sort of summarized in a couple slides. We have a few things due this year and next year, and we have a lot of due dates throughout the permit term. So
we've been just a little more background on Krista because she is kind of the region's expert. We have a contract with Brown and Caldwell to kind of help us stay on track with these permit requirements. But the other nice thing about Brown and Caldwell and the work that Krista does is a lot of the co-permitting meetings and just kind of looking at the region. I think Brown and Caldwell's working for several Phase 1 communities, and then many of the co-permittees. So it kind of it's helped to keep us in the know of what the other agencies are doing, and it helps with negotiations with DEQ on what kinds of requirements make sense. DEQ is more familiar with Krista than they are with the city staff or county staff. So that's been a good relationship and something that it helps us where maybe there's things that we suggest might be staff needs. We may contract that stuff. That's another efficiency that we think is going to be helpful because, again, there might be an opportunity for West Linn, Gladstone, Oregon City, and Clackamas County to do something, but the effort involved in creating an intergovernmental agreement to get all those things to come together it's so much more easy to just kind of work with a consultant to kind of make sure that need gets met that way. So.
You identified pollution prevention as one of the elements. The one thing that this doesn't address, there's kind of growing evidence of pharmaceuticals being found in the waterways, and I think they're already identifying stuff like Prozac in water actually affecting like fish behavior and stuff. And is there some way, even though there's not TMDLs for all the different pharmaceuticals that are getting to the waters, to get something to help people find better ways of disposing of old prescriptions and things of that sort?
They do have that program is very focused on the wastewater treatment plants and not so much stormwater, because that's really where it's coming out from. And they do have programs where they collect pharmaceuticals and things like that. I'm not as familiar with them just because it's more wastewater water focused.
But I'm trying to remember there's several groups in Clackamas County, or one that I'm thinking of. It's a Clean Rivers group where like paint take backs and recycling programs where they're collecting tons of this material in one weekend, and then there's the medical take back. I think the dental industry is kind of looking at
mercury.
things that for mercury, and so it's not just cities that are kind of on the hook for a lot of that. Others.
I got a question of John or any of you. In meeting your mission as Public Works people with these requirements, these federal and state requirements. What do you think this adds to the cost of doing business in this city, and how is it paid? Unless you already discussed that, I came late. I just kind of like to know what you think it adds.
Well, we pulled a cost slide out of here because it was out of date and we hadn't had a chance to kind of talk about it. Kristen and I hadn't, but I think there's significance to this. I mean, if you look at that slide with all the dots on it, it's something that's going to, over the permit term, it's significantly increased our requirements. And a lot of that's reporting requirements, a lot of it's data collection. Some of it's actually constructing things, but a lot of it's so much about.
Are you asking from the developer standpoint, though?
I'm asking from a city management standpoint, one, what do you think it costs roughly, generally? And then how do you acquire the funds to make this happen?
Pull up that slide. Again, we did talk a little bit about this at the beginning, Jerry. I mean, these are regulatory requirements, and there's not too many regulatory requirements that come with funding.
Right.
They're just requirements, and the expectation is the agencies will meet those requirements, and that's no different for this program here. DEQ and EPA have placed these requirements, on the city and other agencies. So we have to find ways to make this happen. But one way is, if an agency doesn't have a stormwater rate, the expectation is you get one. Mm-hmm. If the agency's stormwater rates are too low, the expectation is that you raise them. Now, these are some old costs. I think these are from a couple years ago, right? So, again, looking at the bullets that we had up there before, these are some of the costs that we were talking about a couple years ago, and I think there's, if sometimes using consultants can save us some effort, especially when we look at staffing. But reality of it is when we start talking about doing inventories and interfacing with our business community, that's often hard to do with a consultant. Now we can do some of that with like interns, those kind of things, and maybe save some costs. We'll be looking at all those ideas. But if we're talking capital improvement projects, that's a much bigger thing. If we're talking stream restoration, these numbers go off the charts, and the only way we're going to pay for that is through stormwater utilities.
Actually, you work in partnership with nonprofits, and they can apply for grants and funding. I mean, that's what PG is doing with Clackamas River Basin Council right now to get the water temperatures down. They're contracting with the Watershed Council to increase stream vegetation, 43, 45 miles of tributaries. So
They've done some work in Oregon City too.
Yeah.
So those are great ideas for the capital kinds of things, and there's opportunities for a lot of this other data gathering as well. We haven't yet figured all that out.
One of our members 4 years ago was the environmental manager for Blue Heron, and she, when your predecessor came in to give us a report, Nancy Kreshower, about this whole thing, she understood it totally because the mill had to comply for the very beginning of the cycle of NPDES requirements and all that. And of course, for them, they just increase the price of product, assuming they can be competitive in the marketplace. For you guys, for public officials, you can't do that. You got to figure out another way to meet the need. And I was just interested in it. You're looking at $400,000 here, roughly, is what I see, close to it, of an annual need here. If you look at all those things on this chart, and obviously that's a challenge for you, I would think.
It is.
Yeah. I have another question. When you talked about retrofits, when you were pointing that out, and you were talking about McLaughlin Boulevard Phase 2, is it now? Phase 2. I know there were some plans to do some bioswales or whatever near McDonald's, and then they got moved next to Rivershore Hotel. When would we be able to look at the concept of what's being designed as a committee?
Well,
or is there an open house or something?
In April, and I don't know the date in April, but in April there's a 30% design review meeting for the public. It's called, I can't remember what. It's an advisory group that's open to the public. That'll be published. I just right now
Okay.
that date hasn't been set, but I know that project's got a fair amount of interest.
It'd be interesting if we could look at some of the concepts that are being, considered. If not now, then. So, okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was really, actually,
Yeah.
quite interesting. Appreciate it very
So,
much.
I guess, I don't know that I mentioned this in the beginning, but in April, we're hoping to do a work session with the City Commission on this. Again, just kind of giving them information. It's been 2 years since we've been to the City Commission, and there's some new city commissioners that hadn't seen this, or at least they weren't on the City Commission when we presented before. Queuing up a little bit for that kind of, there's all these requirements, and more resources will be needed, just kind of giving them an early warning of that, and maybe getting some more ideas from them as well. So it'd be great if that's a work session, so it's the second Tuesday of the month. I think those meetings usually start around 5:30. So if you can attend that,
Sure.
it'd be good, because work sessions are intended to not only just be about presentations, it's about discussion too. So usually, especially somebody from this advisory committee, we're there to chime in with suggestions like we've heard tonight. That'd be great.
It's nice to see the process is evolving.
I just have one other question, I guess. And Gail Johnson, is that correct? Okay. How do you coordinate with folks exactly, like developers, or how does that work exactly, I guess, with your position?
My position?
Yeah.
I've been here going on 15 years, and I started out as a water quality technician on the drinking water side. And then when all of these new stormwater things were obviously coming our way, we did get a technician who's been with us now about 4.5 years. But basically now I do a lot of reports and programs on the drinking water side still.
Yeah,
And,
okay.
and we're doing what we can. We're going to add these new things and do the best we can.
Yes.
Gail
A lot of work.
pretty much leads the effort on the drinking water quality report that you get in the mail.
Yep. Okay.
She also
Good.
has become, over the last couple of years, way more involved with our annual stormwater reports. And if you've got a backflow preventer on your yard, you get a letter
You get it right.
from Gail.
Yes.
Which I might say, some of these programs for the private inspection and the industrial, virtually all of the people with private water quality facilities, we already have in our database for this cross-connection control
Okay.
program. So where we can, we're going to use that program for letter generation and give us an opportunity. If we're going to be on site to see one thing, we're going to try to catch the drinking water requirements as well as the stormwater requirements too. It just makes sense to do that as efficiently as possible. It's all time consuming, and we just kind of plug away at it. And a decade goes by just like that.
Thank you.
Well, with that,
Thanks.
Brian, we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Glad you could join us, Mike.
Thanks, John. Will this PowerPoint, is this PowerPoint something that would be on the website? Or a similar one to it, like the city commission one? Okay. Thanks. Oh, just somewhere.
Oh, we have the presentation.
Yeah. Oh, let me turn this off.
The presentation is over.
I do need 5 minutes. That earthly thing is under the communications.
Okay.
So push your button to the right there. That'll take you back to your screen. Help yours out up there.
What are we doing? Okay.
So do we get a 2-minute break here?
Yeah, why don't we take a quick break and we can reconvene?
All right. That sounds like a good idea.
Another good idea.
Somebody's glad. I'm going to get the meeting going again here, and our next agenda item is approval of minutes, which we do not have ready to approve, so we're going to go on to public comment. This is public comment on any items that aren't on our agenda. Those who have signed up for a specific item will be at that item in our discussion. So any comments? Okay, so the first item is amendments to the Heritage Tree Code, and we'll have we have a staff report,
Yeah.
and just call that up real quick. And you have a report on that?
Yeah, I have a brief report on that. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
So we have a staff report, and then we have a couple of attachments. We have a red line version of our our heritage tree code, and then we have a non-red line version as well. So both versions in your packet. Looking back through our previous meetings and the videos of some of the concerns that we had on the code today.
Oh, you're good.
I think,
We can go either way.
Thank you.
I think we're getting closer to a code that will incorporate some of your most recent concerns. And what those concerns were from the last meeting were in response to the need to allow some other form of report than an arborist report to satisfy the site and condition criteria, and that could take the form of either ecological report or stand report. So there's some language in there about that. Also allowing for a report submitted by a forester or ecologist instead of a certified arborist for the purposes of establishing compliance with the criteria. Also, there was we've been discussing whether to replace the term grove with another term such as stand, and then improve the definition of that term.
Yeah.
And Brian and Richard had written in a definition that was based on canopy cover, and so that's what we've incorporated into the code today. Also, we did not include a good definition for the term hazardous tree, and we do have a definition of what a hazardous tree or diseased tree is already in our code, and that is potentially useful here. So I'll just read it. And this was adopted by the City Commission in 2010. Hazardous or diseased tree means a tree that is a naturally occurring disease that is expected to kill the tree, or that presents a significant risk to life or property as determined by a certified arborist. To the extent that the Community Development Director determines that the hazardous or diseased condition of the tree is the result of intentional action, the removal of the tree shall require mitigation pursuant to Code Section 1741.060. An otherwise healthy tree that may become a hazard to a proposed future development shall not be considered a hazardous tree. Hazardous trees may include, but are not limited to, dead, diseased, broken, split, cracked, leaning, and uprooted trees. A tree harboring communicable diseases or insects of a type that could infest and cause a decline of adjacent or nearby trees may also be identified as a hazardous tree. And that's the definition that we use in development review. So if that would also, by cross-referencing that section for the purposes of the heritage tree ordinance, you may be able to use that definition as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm wondering about the reference to naturally occurring versus disease, impediment, or condition, because some of the other things, split, rot, whatever, there are a lot of things that can lead to the tree being not considered safe or not considered to be good adjacent neighbor to healthy trees. And I'm wondering, well, I was going to suggest something here, instead of getting rid of natural occurring, and instead just has a disease, impediment, or condition that is expected to kill the tree, or that presents a significant risk to life or property because I think there's more things than just a disease at work here. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about that. Especially when you describe other impediments that the tree may have.
I see.
Broken conditions, things like that. I like the whole thing.
Yeah.
I understand it.
Yeah. Okay. I've noted that as a possible amendment. How do the rest of the committee feel about that?
And I really like, personally, the business of stand and the canopy, as I understand, still being 80%. Is that right?
Yeah. I haven't really gone into detail on where the edits are in the code, but
you've done a really good job of trying to sort this out because it's changed a lot.
Yeah. Even though I recommended the 80%, I still want to discuss that a little bit.
Sure.
That was from a scientific definition of forest as opposed to woodland. And if it's 80%, it qualifies as a forest, and which is a natural state of most of Western Oregon is a forest. But at the same time, I could see cases where a woodland might justify, but it would have fewer trees than a forest with lesser canopy. And so that's something to be discussed, I think. But that's a good, a scientifically valid way of defining what you want.
Right.
Is the percentage. The 80 is, pretty good, but
So
if you had a lighter woods with openings, it might not qualify, and you would have to do it individual trees.
Yeah, so at the end of the red line version, where we define tree or tree stand.
Excuse me, are you looking at 1355?
I am looking at
It's on the very
page 5
right here.
of the red line version
Tree or tree
on your
stand.
screen. So the second document
1380.
But you could incorporate those terms, Brian, potentially in that definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me find that. Oh, you got it?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll continue just with the other items that we wanted to concentrate on. We wanted to clarify the role of the Natural Resources Committee in the review process.
Well, excuse me just a minute. Did
Oh,
you get
sorry.
The question
Yeah.
on 80%, did you want to?
I just throwing that out for potential, for
Oh,
discussion.
Okay, let's
at this
discuss
point.
that.
Yeah.
I really feel that we should stay with that because it's a defining criteria that is measurable, and it takes care of a lot of the things that were kind of tenuous before. And I think it protects the integrity of the stands if they have that condition.
I guess I don't see the significance of 80%.
Well, that's straight out of university scientific discussion.
But what's the significance of it, though? We're
Well,
talking about a tree or tree stand.
this is a tree stand. It had no significance with an individual tree.
Yeah.
But if there's a stand of trees that, according to this way of defining things, qualifies as a forest at 80% or above, whereas a lesser percent, I forget what it goes down to, 80 down to maybe 50 or 40, I forget the exact figure, is defined as a woodland.
I guess I don't see
It's not in here.
So-
That part isn't in there.
As far as our program here.
Well, if you're going to, you have to have some way of defining what a stand is.
It's,
You know,
well,
is it
you could say,
more than 2 trees, or is it?
I'd say 2 or more trees.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
even
just
if,
End it right
Yeah.
there for
If-
50, 80%.
yeah, and does that include trees that are not adjacent on the
I
same
think
private
because the
property?
discussion of this came out of whether they were 20 feet apart or not, which we
Right,
decided was not a
originally.
good
Yeah.
Yeah, which is-
definition.
Yeah, which is too small to be a workable
But
definition.
then if you're going to use a different definition and then those trees start to get falling farther apart, then, I would nominate them individually if they're that important, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there is the possibility of,
yeah.
If it was a large area, it would be, be that many, however many trees are.
Yeah.
And
But
another question on stands is, does that, do the trees individually have to meet the criteria that we had set out? That's
Right.
another story.
so
And if we were just describing a forest, it could be a mixture of smaller and larger trees, which is normal for a forest.
yeah, let me point to what we wrote in most recently for that. So what we said was on page 1 of 6, under the recommendation section, part 2, in the red line version, you can see it, but you can also see it. Individual trees may be submitted for nomination by completing a form. If the nomination is for a stand of trees, the nomination shall be accompanied by sufficient information such as a stand health report to adequately assess how the stand of trees meets the designation criteria in section D. So that allows for something other than an individual nomination for, X many trees.
I just think this is a great improvement over what we were dealing with before in the field. And Richard, you were there when we were looking at things, and Bob, you were too in the field, and it was wasn't easy. This simplifies it, I think.
Okay. Well, that's the hope.
I believe it
Yeah.
does. And
Okay.
it also protects the integrity of what we're trying to do.
I guess I continue to
Yeah.
not quite understand why, the significance of the 80%. I mean, it
Yeah.
just, I'm not sure why that's significant to considering it a stand or an individual
Well,
tree.
it's a scientific definition that's accepted rather broadly.
Right, but why is it significant to the heritage tree issue, though?
It's
stand.
only there to come up with a way of defining what a stand is. I mean, we have to have a definition. We can't
Well, we
just
could
say a
say-
stand is a bunch of trees. That'd be one option.
That's
But-
what I'm suggesting. We could say it's 2 or more trees.
That meets the following criteria,
Yeah.
which is what this basically says.
Well, I would up that to at least 3 trees, because 2, it's like, that's not really a stand. It's only 2 trees. 3, maybe.
It's it's kind of what you define it as, though.
Yeah,
I mean, if it's a stand, if you define it as 2 trees, it's 2 or more,
yeah, that's true.
You could have a mature big leaf maple, 2 feet in diameter, and right next to it a 6-inch diameter juvenile. That would constitute a stand. Is that what you want?
I'm just suggesting the 80% to me seems unnecessary, and I'm not sure why it's needed to define a heritage tree or stand. See, I'm having a problem with the
Okay,
function
so you
of
would
the
like to
definition idea.
simplify it, in other words, to just saying 2 or 3 or more trees.
Well, if that works, yeah.
Well,
But
that's a
I'm
good
not-
question.
Well, they have to meet the criteria,
Yeah.
so that will
Yeah,
help.
yeah, that will help.
There's a series of criteria it has to meet.
Then they're going to have to define each tree again.
Well, no, stands of trees may also be designated by meeting the criteria. So
Right,
it says either a tree or stand of trees if they meet the criteria.
which are the same criteria
A tree or
as...
stand is associated with events in history.
Mhm.
It's associated with the life of a person or group of historic significance, represents a significant distinguishable entity within Oregon City.
Okay, as opposed to an individual tree meeting those same criteria,
It
which...
could be one or both.
Yeah.
It could either be the individual tree or the stand. So, and then it has to meet these criteria as well. Site and condition criteria. So
Right, just
there's-
like a
the
normal-
criteria is what would sort of be the determining factor, not the 80%, because this
Mhm.
is, after all, an urbanized
Yep.
area. I think there's some,
So in some ways, it would be actually more flexible without that particular definition.
yeah, just taking that part out.
So by taking that out, then it could be rows of trees or scattered trees, so it would not have to meet that criteria. But if there were several significant trees scattered around a property, it wouldn't be a forest at all, it would be scattering of trees,
A
And-
stand,
and-
a stand of trees.
Yeah, so a stand of trees, but they could be, all 50 feet or more apart, let's say, for example.
Huge oak trees may
Yeah.
not be sitting right next to each other with their canopies touching, but
Right.
there's 3 of them within a designated space that wouldn't meet the 80% criteria, but
Right.
they'd be part of a stand of oak trees.
Okay,
I mean, that's just a,
But are they, or are those just 3 candidate heritage trees?
yeah.
Yeah, you could have a numeric.
It could be done either
either
way.
You
way.
could say 5 or less
Yeah.
do the form, or 5
Yeah,
or more. maybe.
that's why I'm saying
Something
2
like
trees,
Yeah.
I don't see the advantage, because you have to define them as meeting the criteria anyway. And so it's not really going to save that much as far as the effort of registering this.
I agree with Shaw. I think the definition is less important than the criteria in the designation process. So if there's a definition you feel would suffice to satisfy the group, then we can make that change easily enough.
Okay, So,
Yeah.
so
You remember what we went through 8 months ago, and then
Oh, yeah.
6 months ago, and then 4 months ago, and the community that came, and some of the folks are here tonight. And whatever we do, it's got to be clear, and it needs to be inclusive and not confusing. And where I'm coming from here as one member of this body is that I'm here advocating for every tree I can keep in the city to be a part of an assemblage. If it's a part of an assemblage, to keep that assemblage alive, intact. If it has to be replaced, then we do it in the best manner, which is what your mitigation requirements are all about. But my interest is seeing people start looking at assemblages and not just the historic character. I know the heritage ordinance is written that way, but the whole assemblage has a value. And so whatever we're doing, I don't want to have it be confusing to people again. And personally, I want to see it retain the character of the landscape that supports wildlife.
Yeah, and that would be one of the, you got to meet one of the 4 criteria for
Yeah.
heritage.
Right.
So that would be,
Sure.
that would be.
But you've done a really good job. There's some other little edits in here I'm wondering about,
Sure.
but whatever.
yeah, there's a couple I need to bring up, but
Sure.
Can we have a clear motion on this?
Oh, well, do
Just
you
so
want to
that-
hear public comment on this? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we still have public comment. That's right. There's other comments here. We've got a list of significant native trees in 1704, 1380, and that includes some non-native species. And I think that should be corrected, and then be more specific. Like cedar covers dozens of types of trees, and that's all it says. And we could limit it to the actual native species.
Okay, let me make note of that.
All right. Are you asking, Mr. Chairman, that we look at other parts of the ordinance? I was looking at some things within the first.
Yeah, anything that, we're supposed to be discussing,
Well,
so yes.
Page 6 of 6 in the document I have, which is basically 17.04, definition of a tree or tree stand, ornamental. Ornamental tree means, for the purposes of tree removal, any tree, including shade trees. I think it should, purposes of tree removal or retention. We're not just looking at the idea of, seems like that should be in there, of removing things. The intention is to retain when we can. That's just a little.
You could just remove the purposes of tree removal entirely and say means any tree.
Okay, however you want to do it. And then this document consistently refers to the Natural Resource Committee, parentheses, tree subcommittee shall review. Are we saying that the tree subcommittee is going to take over the duties of this committee, or what?
For the time being, it's going to be the Natural Resources Committee.
Okay.
And Eric is our standing chair.
Right.
Sorry, he's not here, but.
Appreciate the work Eric's done, but I also remember the work done before and that committee went away.
Well, yeah, until it gets staffed up again, and we
Yeah.
need to take the time to
Okay.
recruit those members
Right.
still. So it's one of the tasks that we need to do.
Are
Just
you
feel like
keeping
this-
up with these suggested changes?
Well, I wrote that one down.
Okay. I have one under purpose, A,
Yeah.
first sentence. It says certain trees, and because we're also dealing with stand of trees, just to make it clear, I might suggest you add or stand of trees. So certain trees are stand of trees
Oh, yeah.
because of their age, and that just,
Okay.
Okay, just to jump around a little bit, we have a minor issue again with that last statement on the 6th page.
What page are we talking about?
The same one where you just made a comment.
Page 6 of 6.
6 of 6, yeah. And we have ornamental tree, evidently, according to the way it's written now, is anything that originated as nursery stock. Does that include native trees as well?
Good point.
Trees that are native in their origin, but, that would be growing here naturally, but were planted as nursery stock. Shouldn't they be under the same,
Good point.
the same criteria as other natives?
Okay. So, yeah.
Or do you
this-
even know in some cases?
This
Well,
definition is so.
In some cases, if it's already planted and nobody remembers when it was planted, it could have just come up from seed naturally.
Sure.
But, if nobody knows, evidently we'd have to assume it was native. But, if, I know
Yeah.
we do have planted oaks around Oregon City.
The
of
definition
native variety.
itself is not actually used in the code. It's kind of put in there because a lot of the tree definitions were inserted into the code from other places. So, but yeah, we can make that.
And then going back to the one with the list of trees as redwood and sequoia, which are native only. Well, one of them.
Which
bears-
page?
Which page are you on?
5 of 6.
Bottom of page 5. Western red cedar and Alaska cedar are native. The western red cedar site-specific native as opposed to just up in the mountains. The redwood and sequoia are primarily California trees, and it should specify which oak and ash. And the birch, the closest native ones are in the Cascades and the Seattle area. There's a native one from there on north. And of course, it's big leaf maple or fine maple or Douglas maple. Those are all native, at least here, 2 of them here, and then the third one in the mountains. The Douglas
Matula,
maple.
Occidentalis, Western River Birch.
Yeah, the Western River birch is one, and there's also a real oddball that grows only as a shrub in the Cascades. But it's not an ornamental, it's, a scrawny thing.
Okay. So native to Oregon.
But it is native to Oregon, like
Yeah.
up at Clackamas Lake is where I've run across
This
it.
is the trouble with common names. you know.
Yeah, because maple, there's hundreds of kinds of maple.
Yeah. So I think they're thinking broad categories here, but
Yeah.
we can make
Well,
that
they
distinction.
meant the big leaf maple, I'm sure, maybe vine maple as well, but both
Yeah.
of those should be, so that, somebody doesn't say, oh, this is a maple,
Right.
because Yeah, and it could be.
And that
from-
list in here is, it's kind of a informational, the list
Yeah.
of eligibility is informational in nature. Any tree can be nominated, but we're going to be reviewing those ones that may or, we're going to review them for their integrity or their native status or their
Yeah.
invasiveness, if they are.
Yeah, there's definitely invasives out there.
Okay.
Okay.
One point I didn't get to when I was presenting is that you brought this point up, Brian, that if the NRC is inactive or not functioning at the time, then the nominations would be forwarded to the city commission by the community development director. So that's a change that's in there, or an addition. So that's kind of it. I know that there are the site and condition criteria, which must all be satisfied, may need some modification of the one that we wrote in that said the subject property on which the tree or trees is located is not the subject of a submitted or approved land use application.
Yeah.
Now, notwithstanding that a willing property owner who consents to that after a land use action is approved is, not going to be.
Yeah, where did this, was this in there before?
This
or-
came up, let's see, I want to say February. It was not in the original code.
Okay.
It's an addition, and part of the rationale for that was to concentrate on the use of this code as a mechanism for celebrating heritage trees. And not to confuse it with other items such as land use review and those sorts of things, where there are standards in place and that sort of thing.
Where is this located?
It's three,
On page 3
close
of
to the
6?
middle.
Yeah.
It's, let me
And I am pretty sure
G.
that,
E4.
E4.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
so I'd like to get this language
How
exactly
about
right.
if you say it conflict with? So the subject property on which the trees are located,
Yeah,
tree or trees is located, are not the subject. How about if you just say are not in conflict?
not in conflict with. That sounds pretty good.
No? Something,
Yeah.
it's like
This is
Bearing in
really
mind that
bad.
this will go up to the planning commission and the city
a
commission. by
subject
the-
property.
This- It actually says the subject property is not the subject of a submitted or approved land use application. Therefore, any property that's ever had a land use approval,
Right,
it wouldn't
I
apply,
don't
the way
like
that's written.
right, we don't want
That's
to say
actually
that.
true.
I don't
We
like
don't
this
want
either.
that.
No, we don't.
So, that needs to be revised somehow.
Yeah,
What would be absolutely the problem if a tree was designated a heritage tree and developer would come in and say, I have to build around the heritage tree?
There'd be a covenant on it, so.
That's right, once it's
right,
actually identified.
Yeah.
and,
So
Or
if someone
deed
goes to
restriction.
make a pre-application and the tree or stand of trees has not been designated or identified as heritage stand or heritage
point.
tree, at that point, it's their,
They're in land use and the rules apply at the time of
the
application.
no rules.
okay, what
Right.
rules would
Well-
be in place?
There aren't any.
1741, mitigation is required.
It's,
so,
that mitigation is no rule.
right,
It's
so,
like cut down a forest and put up 12 twigs.
right.
That's what mitigation is.
Well, it's better than it was. It used to be no mitigation for trees within the construction envelope, and now you're required to mitigate for trees within the construction envelope, and there's a different table. So it's getting more and more specific. So you have 4 options, and that's part of what's driving that is this clear and objective criteria requirement for residential construction, which is, if you do building codes, you got to have this criteria. And, where it is today is, maybe not where it's going to be in the future, assuming there's further revisions to it, so, yeah. But that was done, pretty much revised completely in 2008 and 2010 again, so, yeah.
Okay. Okay, do we have any more discussion before we call the citizens forward?
I did.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It really had to do with, it's 12.08.045, and it's called gifts and funding. So
Okay.
the city receives some gifts, which are designated for the purpose of planting the trees. The community development director is the one who gets to determine the type, caliber, species, the cost, and all of that, without review by anyone. And I think it might be appropriate for those choices to be reviewed by the Natural Resource Committee
Okay.
or some other.
There's some standards, but as far as size and things like that, but I don't think particularly as to species other than nuisance trees. I'm not even sure if that's in there.
All right.
It should be.
Let me give you a little background on, because this code section has been in the code for a long time. And then in response to so many tree removal requests in the 3-foot planter strip citywide, so every year I think we review about 50 or 60 tree removal requests from homeowners who absolutely don't want their tree. And we say, no, you have to replant a tree once you've repaired the sidewalk. And you use the list that we give you. And then if your planting strip is 2 feet or less, then you have the option of paying this fee, which is $296 per tree. And that goes into a dedicated fund, which is currently at $12,000, and no money from that fund has been expended yet because we haven't determined a good program to leverage it. We've had some conversations with Friends of Trees, and potentially you could use that funding to leverage a Friends of Trees program in specific areas, targeted areas, so that large areas of right-of-way can get replanted. But for the time being, funds that are paid as fee in lieu go into that one line item. So our first option and our first priority is replanting with an appropriate species of tree. And we get to make that call as staff over the counter because it's efficient and we're dealing with a homeowner who has to repair their sidewalk, and most of the time they're not happy at all. And so that's how the policy has evolved today. We deal with a lot of people in the older subdivisions in the South End and Hazel Grove and all those areas that were developed in the 80s and 90s with an inadequate planter strip width of 3 feet or less. And the requirement was to put trees in there, but we didn't have an adopted list. And so the developers put them in, and 10 years later, sidewalks start popping.
Yeah,
And,
I've been involved with some of those people who live up there that I know. And
So it's a problem of inspection, it's a problem of inadequate ground preparation and planting preparation, and the procedure for planting the tree, A, selecting the tree, and then B, planting the tree and making sure it's done right so that the roots don't go immediately to the surface and follow water lines, That helps too, but that's not in place yet either. So in the meantime, what we've been doing is just responding in this very piecemeal fashion. It's certainly not the best way to run an urban forestry program, but at the very least, we are tracking property by property what is being requested for removal and making sure that there's a replacement, however small the tree ultimately is. In new development, Public Works standard for a planter strip is 5.5 feet now with the new TSP, which is half a foot wider each side of the street, which is nice. Actually, it's going to be 6 foot, not 5.5. So 6 foot of actual planting area, not including
that's
the
getting to
curb.
be adequate,
Getting to be barely adequate.
except for the very biggest trees, or ones that are very rooty,
So in new development, it's going to be better. But I think we're going to be dealing with this issue in the older subdivisions for, eternity.
I know that some of those developers decades back were getting the fastest growing tree they could find because they're cheap. They can be produced quickly, therefore cheaply. And so way too many inappropriate trees were put in those tiny little strips. And
Were you suggesting, Shaw, maybe more oversight by the Natural Resource Committee in this gift and funding somehow? I kind of heard, I thought.
Well,
I might
at
be
least
hearing
a review of like maybe the 12,500 or maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
it is-
agree.
I
Yeah.
have issues. Any code that gives carte blanche to one person to do anything is always sometimes it's.
So
to
you're
be-
you're kind of focused on that one sentence, the
I
community
am.
development director may determine the type, caliber, and species of the trees purchased with the fund.
No, I have no
But what's
problem editing that. That's,
if we develop a list that he's working with to eliminate the inappropriate ones and so on, which we're working on, that would help a lot. Because, we're not, we don't.
Maybe if you would just put in there, I mean, it's obvious already, but from the street tree list or something of.
Yeah, once that's available, that'll be doable.
I'd just like to say one thing about street trees and stormwater. People are spending, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to mitigate for stormwater runoff. And it's all in new development, let's face it. We're not worried about stormwater runoff in our pastures, usually. The dynamic for me is we cut down the native forests, which are evergreen, which during the rainiest parts of the year, my experience is like October, November, December, January, February, March, when it's really raining, we have trees all over the city that don't stop stormwater at all. The rain comes down, it falls straight to the street and goes in the gutters, down the drains. Well, in a natural forest, it takes a pretty good rainstorm to even have the soil get wet at the bottom of the tree canopy. So when we call these, like, street trees are all approved, it's like we're cutting off our left arm to do something with our right arm. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, just from a logical perspective, it makes absolutely no sense.
Do what now?
To not be planting evergreen
Evergreens.
trees.
Oh, I see.
For
Okay.
street trees, for mitigation of stormwater. So you're spending millions of dollars on systems to manage the stormwater that fir trees, cedar trees naturally do just by standing
Right.
there. And we cut them all down from the areas where they always have mitigated stormwater runoff, and in their place we put pavement, houses, impervious surface, and then our growing living things have no leaves on them for the majority of the rainy season, so they're not doing anything except taking up space. And they're not doing anything. It's not like these trees are really doing anything. They're not producing tons of oxygen, carbon, they're doing nothing. They're just sitting there twigs most of the year. So I'd just like to bring that into the conversation, even though it may not be the popular way people look at this, but it's like something is missing from this large equation that we're talking about, which is trying to live on the planet in a sustainable way. This doesn't make any sense. Just putting that out there. And there's not, I guarantee you, probably a street tree on the list that's evergreen.
Well, it requires a larger planting strip.
Understood.
Yeah.
That's why the whole issue of stands is so important, because it gives a chance for assemblages to be retained. And that's why I was so strongly advocating for that. And I wasn't differentiating between evergreen, deciduous, whatever the stand was, is a better than no mechanism, strictly a deciduous mechanism. But I agree with Shaw.
Any additional planting area in the public right-of-way for new areas is going to add to the existing 53-foot minimum for everything that's in there. So that includes the public works standards, so what is on the street between the curb and the sidewalk. And, everything needs to fit within that 53-foot local street standards. So if that's going to increase, then it increases the amount of dedication on private property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. While I advocate for the largest possible strip in the right-of-way, there are practical constraints.
So I'm also seeing in
yeah.
parks around the city and different places that are city-owned, instead of, when they're doing new tree plantings, instead of planting evergreen trees, they're planting sticks of deciduous trees. It's like, I don't get it.
Well, we're talking about the street tree code. I can't answer for the Parks Department.
Pete, I think there is, because we were talking about like stormwater runoff and things.
Honestly, you can talk to Larry Potter about that, but, you know,
Well,
that is
aren't we
not
working
what
on a
I'm
tree
reviewing here.
ordinance?
Pardon?
Aren't we working on a tree ordinance?
This is a
just
public street
heritage
tree ordinance, which
Okay.
happens to have a heritage tree ordinance within it, yeah.
Okay.
Pete, the one point I did want to make about the deciduous trees is thermal pollution is a serious consideration. And if the deciduous trees do provide shade for part of the year and keep the street pavement and sidewalks cooler, and you do have moisture coming down,
Yep.
it tends to keep it a little bit cooler as it runs off. And that's an important consideration when you
Oh, I
have
know.
cool water species. So it's not perfect, but I'm saying there is some benefit.
We gave 6 outreach talks to neighborhood associations when we were explaining our tree policy, our replacement policy. 2 years ago, Gaffney Lane, Tower Vista, Barkley Hills. And we started with that very point. Why are trees important? So the first part of the PowerPoint was stormwater, safety, aesthetics, all of that. Because without the educational component, you don't get any buy-in from the public. So, and it was successful. I think people understood why there is a street tree code. But I don't know if it alleviated the main concern that people have, which is the cost of repair to the infrastructure, which they are responsible for. And the way that we tried to advocate for the tree was because the tree has benefits that accrue directly to the abutting property, and the bigger the tree, the bigger the benefit. So we did try to do that. And in fact, that's on our website. So the first thing you see when you go to download a tree removal and replacement application is why we think trees are important. And then, then you can apply. So, but,
I'm going to invoke David Frazier here because I remember him sitting right over here 5 months ago talking to us about his dream was mitigation banking and other themes that would really create not just a closed canopy, but the benefits of a forest. And I almost think that's what Shaw's in part maybe could be a solution.
Yeah.
Is that we seriously look, in addition to the street trees, these open public areas, lots of public lands he talked about, that could be enhanced with plantings that would be more evergreen in character. But I think it's fundamentally an important thing she brought up. Right. I have a question of our process here. I see that approval of minutes, I wasn't here then, but public comment is item 4. We're already into item.
We had no public comment that wasn't attached to one of our discussions.
So are we going to allow people to do
I
that?
actually asked them, the audience, if there was any comments that weren't attached directly. Now, I do have a sheet here for one that's attached to our very discussion right now.
Okay, fine.
So that was covered.
So are we going to have public comment?
We are shortly, as soon as we get done talking.
All right, I'm asking. Normally it was done at the beginning of the meetings, all right?
Yeah. I wasn't here at the very beginning.
Okay. All right, fine.
But
I just want to answer back to Shaw. The code section that we really ought to concentrate on in response to that concern is the other code, 1741.
Well, I'd like to
Yeah.
suggest that we have that as one of our next agenda items.
Agreed.
Yeah.
that's something that we should look at in the future.
Yeah, sure.
Not tonight.
Not tonight, no. We're good.
Okay. I could make this comment later, but it does apply to what we're talking about. When we get to the tree list, there's trees that are native that nobody's using that would fit the bill. They're evergreen, but they're not conifers. And they're smaller trees. They would be appropriate street trees if we can get them to be produced by. There's only a handful of nurseries that are producing them, but they, you go up in the Cascades and there they are, and they grow fine here. I have seen them. So that'll, having the proper tools, in other words, access to the proper selections, will really help. And one of our problems with evergreens as street trees is that our native ones are so huge. I've seen Douglas fir with 10-foot thick trunks at the ground.
Absolutely.
And, it's just not an appropriate street tree. But there are other non-natives that would be more in the size range with a 6-foot strip that we could actually recommend. And we don't have to stick 100% to natives.
And we could put an asterisk by the evergreen trees.
Right.
Just to make
right.
me happy.
We should have a category for evergreen
Column
conifers.
for natives and with a star in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
They don't have to be you said they
Well, they
don't
don't-
have to be natives.
Well, yeah, right. They don't have to be natives because we're talking ornamentals here. And
Okay.
there are natives that are good ornamentals. There's a hybrid dogwood that's half native and half eastern that's smaller than the native one for smaller strips and would be a good choice. It's on the list right now. So,
Okay.
and the city parks are starting to use it. I have noticed.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can make that change.
Okay.
If you have any other species that you think should be on here, just email. me.
I will.
Yeah.
I will do that. I have to take a good, strong look at what's there and what isn't. So.
Great.
Okay, we have citizen comment here. Jim Nocita.
Good evening, I'm Jim Nocita. I live here in Oregon City. Thanks for allowing me to speak tonight on this ordinance proposal.
Is your mic on?
Is he on? Well, there's a red light. Maybe I'm just not speaking directly.
Okay, just.
Okay. I have some issues to raise with this ordinance, and as context for my my concerns, I want to remind the Commission that how these amendments became proposed. These amendments were proposed as a consequence of the application for Heritage Grove that Mr. Bill Daniels submitted for the Waterboard Park area and the lots just outside Waterboard Park. And I would just want to review the history of what happened with that application. This committee approved it. The McLaughlin Neighborhood, first the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association approved it. This committee approved it. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee approved it. I'm quite sure the CIC approved it. And it never got to the City Commission. It never got to the City Commission. Staff took it to a work session, and it just never got to a vote. And this, instead of sending it to the Commission for a vote, what happened was these ordinance changes were proposed instead. I was concerned at the time that I wasn't sure what the intent of that was, whether it was to discuss really significant and valid changes to the ordinance or to sidetrack and extinguish that application. And the concerns I'm going to express tonight are that the effect of the changes that you in the proposals will extinguish that application. There's several of us in the community that do want to see finally have a vote on that application, and the way there are certain elements in this that will prevent that from moving forward. And I also want to just revisit some of the history of that application too, as far as process, because I have some proposals regarding the procedures of this ordinance that I mean, some may prove controversial for some. Some I don't think will be controversial.
Excuse me, Jim,
Sure.
are you going to go back to the reasons that it would extinguish?
Yeah, I will.
Later?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm gonna kind of walk through that. First, one of the things that happened with Mr. Daniels' application, if some of you may recall, that it took a very, very long time to process the application. I think it was 9 months or something. And it wasn't until it came nearly to this committee that staff asked Mr. Daniels and told him that they needed more information, rather than up front at the beginning when he put in the application. So one thing I would like the Commission to consider, and this is the non-controversial one, is to model a timeline for things like from the time something is submitted to the time it actually gets a hearing here, have a definite maximum time so a citizen doesn't just get strung out for 3/4 of a year or half a year. And I think the simple solution to that is model it after the land use process. I mean, since we've had the land use process for 30 years, a developer has the right to a very set timeline for getting a land use application approved. And those are all in state statute, and we follow them here. They're worked into our code. So, if a planning director has some more information that they need from an applicant, that request has to be made in a certain amount of time, and the applicant has to respond in a certain amount of time. So there is a logical expectation of timelines, both on the part of the municipality and on the applicant, to make everything timely and efficient. And I think it'd be really simple for something like this to incorporate into here some specific timelines on processing, and I don't think that's easy to do. So the whole issue of Mr. Daniels' application is, rose something we confront in Oregon City often about citizen participation, and I thought that was a typical example of something we still struggle with. And I don't want this to turn into something that citizens will have aspirations and will allow them to get have those aspirations frustrated. And again, the Mr. Daniels' application is exemplary in that, as to the way, as to what happened with that. So to get back to your question, is it commissioners here or committee member? Committee member Craven. I have some concerns, specifically going to the point about on section, Mr. Walter mentioned it in section D1B, for the subject property on which the tree or trees is located are not the subject of an approved land use application. I kind of think that is in there specifically because of the Waterboard Park application.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Jim. Could you tell us where that is again? I'm trying to find it here.
Yeah.
Okay.
What
page are we on?
Well, in the
Okay.
We got it.
Okay, you got it.
Under the site and condition
Right.
criteria.
The subject property on which the trees or trees is located are not the subject of a submitted or approved land use application. I mean, obviously the controversy over Mr. Daniels' application, it was in the area that Public Works has in the past wanted to use for an expanded upper yard for the Public Works operation. That's under reconsideration. It's a very long and patient process. But under this language, that would instantly extinguish Mr. Daniels' application. If once you approve a code, if there's something that hasn't been approved, you have to reapply under the new code. And so that application would just, under that language, not be possible. I could see some edits that could be proposed that would make it less sweeping. I agree with Chair Boyce that the way this reads, every subdivision in Oregon City has at one time been the subject of a submitted or an approved land use application. I mean, there would be so much that would just be instantly out of the question, both public and private property. And the preceding sentence, the property owner of an abutting property, or if street tree abutting property owner consents to the designation. So that number 3 kind of makes number 4 moot for all private property. Okay, because if I mean, that's the determinative factor is the consent. I mean, what the issue is, if there's something on public property, can citizens have a say in wanting to reach their elected representatives with a proposal to designate a tree or a heritage grove, and just get that vote from their elected leaders. I could see this if you were really insistent on amending the language in this. I think one thing you could do, for example, to make it less sweeping, is to say the subject property on which the tree or trees is located are not the subject of a pending land use application. For example, the upper yard is no longer the subject of a pending land use application from submission of the application to approval. That site has been approved. It's been long approved. But does it need to be there? Because property, the concern for private property is in the previous sentence. So this really goes to what's going to happen on public property. And if it's public property, the city commission is the governing body of the city. Why not just leave it to the city commission's discretion? The city commission, which is elected by the people, which is accountable to the people. This even deprives the commission of rights, because this is a criteria that would prevent something even getting to the commission, to allow them to vote on it. And I just have real concerns about having this ordinance framed in such a way that kind of public participation and city commission discretion is impinged upon. Another one is less controversial. I think I have equal concerns about it, and that is up in. It also deals with public property. Okay, this is up on page 1 of 6 in the highlighted copy under recommendations, B1 recommendation. For public property, if the tree or heritage stand is located on city property or public right-of-way under city jurisdiction, the nomination form must be signed by the city manager. Commissioner Herman, do you see the language there within that paragraph? Okay.
I get it.
So a city manager who come in all shapes, sizes, and persuasions over time could, prevent a citizen from getting a heritage grove or heritage tree stand even considered on public property, depending, and there's no criteria for this, whether the city manager is going to approve or not approve such an application.
I just want to point out that wasn't the intent of that. It was more of a notification to the city manager that an application has been lodged on city property. It's not intended as an approval or denial.
Does it have that function?
I don't think it does, but if you feel that it does, then we can clarify that.
Yeah, that's this.
What was the purpose of it?
Well, for example, on a land use application that's on city property, the city manager is supposed to sign those as an acknowledgement that, the administrative head of the city is aware of the application and endorses it, or at least is, consenting to it be forwarded through the process. But I don't think it would stop that.
Let's
If
just change
under
it.
the language you just mentioned, consenting to it moving forward in the process,
Oh, okay.
you can say no.
An acknowledgement that it's moving forward through the process.
And if that's, if that's something that's in land use applications now, I think that language should be revised so that, again, depending on the disposition of any city manager at any time in history, a city manager could prevent both a citizen and the commission itself from ever seeing an application for a heritage tree or grove or stand to move forward.
Well, is that sentence really necessary then?
Just take it out. Yeah.
I mean, can
Fine. Yeah.
We do need to get approval of the owner of the tree. And I think that may be where this came from. The city has to.
Well, on private property.
Yeah, on-
There's
but,
always been that
Well,
distinction.
But this
the approval
this
is
land-
going to come from the commission.
Yeah.
Once
Yeah.
it comes before us and goes through the process, the
Right.
commission then determines. So that would be giving approval or non-approval, I would think, by the owner of the tree.
Yeah, okay.
I would
But again,
suggest-
the commission is the governing body of the city.
Yeah.
If it's on private property, it is the city commission that is the authority, and this would give a charter officer who's not the governing body of the city that power that should lie with the commission.
Do you have another one?
No, those are the key. Those are the 3 points I had. The just making the process on a set timeline, either deleting or amending that language about the city manager, so it wouldn't give any city manager, the power to frustrate citizen aspirations on a heritage grove, and similarly, I don't see any use for this the subject property being the subject of a land use application, because again, if it's on private property, it's already taken care of. If it's on public process property, I think citizens should have that right, even if there's controversy. I mean, all environmental issues involve some controversy. Climate change, you have 50,000 people on the Washington Mall. If you have a development dispute involving public property and citizens want to have the commission consider this kind of value in their decision making, okay, the commission could turn down the citizenry. But I think for accountability, it's got to be the power has to be lodged in those power centers that are accountable to the people, and that's the commission. Those are my comments.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. In regard to the one on page 1 of 6, the sentence, the proposed heritage tree or stand, what would be the problem with deleting that? Or does somebody have to sign the application?
There's no problem with deleting it. The intent was that this is going to be forwarded to the city commission anyway, so it really doesn't need to
Don't
be
they have
there.
a chance to take a whack at it at that time, in the
Yeah.
final approval
Yeah.
process?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So they don't need to kind of take a whack at it at the beginning
Yeah.
and end.
We certainly didn't intend
The
for the
commission
city
is going to
manager to be
approve it
able to
eventually.
derail the process.
Or if it's intended to be a notification
It's
process, it could
basically
say
a
that.
notification.
Yeah, if it's going to be a notification process, have a clause using the word notification.
There must be language from the land use code that we could plug in here about, as Jim suggested, timing.
Oh, certainly, yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
And that's
I
a
like
great
that
suggestion. Yeah, the way it works in land use, and Jim knows this, you have 30 days, the city gets 30 days to review the application for completeness, notify the applicant.
Okay.
Then, once it's deemed complete, it's a 120-day decision deadline.
Which would include us meeting and talking about it
Right,
and the whole
right.
thing.
So it's actually going to have to provide for 2 meetings, at least, NRC and then City Commission. But hopefully we can wrap these up in just those
Yeah.
2.
Well,
Yeah.
certainly, city staff could, as a matter of just what they do, is inform the city manager, because that's really all he needs, is
Yeah.
to know that this is up. And
Yeah.
But I think there's one thing maybe to add to that,
Uh-huh.
is if we're going to be part of this review process, we need to get those attachments with seriously enough time to adequately devote time to review it. We can't, if it's an agenda item and it's attachment, we get 4 hours before the meeting starts, that's not
Oh,
really
yeah.
adequate time to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we need.
Give Pete something to do.
Yeah,
At
no,
least a
I-
week in advance.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. We
Yeah.
need time, because
That's
that's not
kind
the
of
only
the-
thing on the agenda either.
Yeah, like the PC will get it a week in advance.
So are we
yeah.
actually going to vote on this?
I think we need to make some changes before you do it. It's
Yeah,
just
I don't-
consideration.
I'd like to consider the following 3 changes,
Okay.
Okay?
other than the ones we've already discussed.
I see nods.
They are that we add a section on the timeline, the process timeline, that we actually delete the sentence in B on page 1, B1, that says if the proposed heritage tree or stand, and that we delete item number 4 on 1A I4 IV on page 3 of 6, which is the one about the subject property and the land use application. I would suggest we consider those 3 amendments in the next version.
Yeah, I really agree on that last one. Staring at it here, I realized that if someone wanted to designate a heritage tree on property they were developing and already had submitted an approval, they couldn't do it.
They
with
couldn't
this
do it,
language,
right. Yeah.
even though they wanted it to.
That was the way I
any-
thought about it when I looked at it again,
Yeah.
too. And it's
And-
like, oh, whoops.
And anyone that doesn't agree to have their property encumbered by this, just by that, it's, so this is completely useless. Completely.
Fair
So
enough.
it should be struck.
Do we agree?
Do we need a second, or?
Are we
It's like-
second?
Aren't we talking about continuing the dialogue to the next meeting or something? Or?
I'd like to see
Well-
those changes incorporated into the next
I
version.
agree
Version,
completely.
and then
Yes, I also have another thing I'd like to bring up here too when I look more closely at the criteria, but go ahead and deal with this. I support Shaw's thinking. I also want to talk about criteria for a second.
Okay.
Thank you all.
thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Appreciate the input.
My concern is Roman numeral 4 of criteria. The criteria, in essence, to me, number 1 means associated with events that had some significance in Oregon City, I guess. Number 2 had to do with life, represented the life of a person or a person that had significance in terms of heritage tree or stand. Number 3 had to do with significance distinguishable to an entity, and I don't know what that means. What was their thinking on that?
That is
It sounds similar to
language
the
from
previous
the from the state heritage criteria.
Okay.
Heritage tree criteria.
All
So
right.
it's not been altered from that. It's fairly broad.
I would suspect that has to do with if it's an impressive tree, it's significant and distinguishable.
Yep.
Say it's 200
It's,
feet tall
by
and
its
6
very
feet thick
nature.
at the trunk, which there's only a few in the neighborhood, but, that's what I would assume that's for.
That's what I read it too. The entity is the tree. Yes.
Right.
All right, that was my question. All right, and then number 4 here, I'm trying to include something that will relate back to natural resource value. This is all heritage, and I guess now I'm going to pick up on number 4 here, where it talks about the tree or stand of trees has age, size, or species significant, which contribute to Oregon City's heritage status. What is a heritage status mean to this group? I'd like to amend that to suggest heritage status in terms of history, which is to me means heritage, or natural resource value. And it's coming back to the habitat issue a little
Well, then
bit.
let's just say heritage status or natural resource value.
All right, fine. It's just putting something in there about the quality of what
I
we're
like
doing.
that. That was missing.
Heritage status
Or-
or
Or natural.
Or natural resource
Natural.
value.
I think the reason it's not in there is because at one time we were trying to separate out heritage
Right,
from natural resources because
Right.
this is a heritage tree.
right. But now we're talking about stands, and we
Yeah.
kept that intact.
No.
at one point we were.
Yeah,
and then we
now it's-
decided
Right.
not
It's
to.
more,
Yeah.
It's morphing.
Yeah.
Right, but I think it's, most of these other things talk about a person or an entity, a tree, and in fact, the significance in the city that it contributed to. Well, there's also a natural resource value that I think this committee is about that we should.
what do they call those trees that are like standalone awesome?
Big.
Big, yeah.
Yeah, you mean like on the mall in Washington D.C.
Significant and distinguishable.
I think the ordinance should say something like heritage trees and trees of significance, or somehow there would be two things this ordinance is dealing with. It's dealing with the history, like John McLaughlin touched this tree,
Right.
and the other one is, this is just an awesome, amazing entity. Yes.
I think that's called a character tree.
Is that what it is?
I think I've read that.
Yeah, that's-
Okay. If we can find a definition for.
Well, that'd be a good term, because that's really what Roman numeral 3 is trying to say. It's just
It
kind
is.
of awkward words.
Right.
Yeah, there's-
Maybe it is,
That's
yeah.
correct, I agree with that.
So what, we're going to call it a character tree or a species tree? Or well, how would people understand?
How about distinguished?
And distinguished. I like that.
We have distinguishable, which is very close.
I mean, what is ultimately on the plaque kind
No,
of thing?
I'm
or,
talking about
uh,
our heading of our code.
Your code?
It's going to say
Okay.
heritage and distinguished or something. We're going to have two things this code is covering. It's covering heritage trees and it's covering species, like a specimen or specimen trees or something like that.
Well, actually, if you take a little broader view, it's heritage criteria, and then you have the 4.
Yeah.
Right.
And what we're trying to say is, I think, is that all 4 of these make it a heritage tree, any one of those 4.
Any one of the 4. And all I'm asking is that we
Well,
add natural resource as a
I think this
component
is-
of number 4.
This is just a way of identifying for
Mm-hmm.
people reading it, because language is so important.
Yes.
Heritage means history, but heritage may not mean awesome tree that's been standing here for 1,000 years. So I'm looking for the word that would identify we're protecting that quality as well as our history, with the natural history as well as the cultural history. So
In
what?
one term,
In one term. In
Monument.
One, he
Monument
said
is such a word.
character tree. It seems like when you have
specimen.
trees, specimen.
Specimen is used in the nursery trade quite a bit, so it's a horticultural term.
We don't want that.
Maybe I feel the term heritage tree is unique enough in and of itself. That term should suffice to meet those definitions, maybe. But, because we use these other terms in
Okay.
the ordinance.
It is in the
significant-
definition. I
Pardon?
mean, the definition covers it.
All right. Let's read the definition. Can't scroll.
I've got a couple of thesauruses on my computer. I'll go through it, see if
So-
there's something out there that we can
So
come
let's
up
start,
with.
instead of saying certain trees,
Heritage tree.
let's say heritage trees.
So we say a heritage tree means a tree that has been designated by the city as having unique importance and is subject to the heritage tree regulations of section 1208.050.
Wow, where'd that come from?
That's in the definition.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
let's start at purpose. Top of page 1 where it says purpose.
Okay.
It says purpose. Instead of certain trees, we're going to say heritage trees or heritage stand or heritage trees or stand of trees because of their age, species, natural resource. So we're defining immediately what a heritage
Good.
tree is. Okay, that would be,
Yeah. And I believe it does that.
yeah, that's better. Thank you. Because it instantly defines that it's not just because of historical
I
stuff.
think that's good.
And I assume
Okay.
that heritage tree, so everywhere else in this amended version now, or stand, is it going to say that, heritage tree or stand?
It does almost everywhere in
Right.
here. It's pretty consistent.
Going back to number 4, did we talk about trying to include heritage tree status, including the natural resource message you had there, Sean? I was trying to get that in there.
Where
Yeah,
are
I
you?
added or natural resource value
Okay,
on the
thank
end
you.
of that.
Thank you.
So that will be in the next round.
All right, good.
Thank
Do
you.
we know what that means? I mean, I hate to just,
Where are
sound
you?
dense here, but, I mean, when we open this up to a broader discussion of the natural resource value of stands of trees, are there trees of ages, sizes, and the like that don't contribute to the natural resource values of stands of trees?
Why don't we reverse that? Are there trees that do contribute?
Well, yes, I mean,
Because of their association.
What I'm suggesting is
Yeah.
that's so inclusive, though, isn't it? There are a damn few that wouldn't, is what I'm asking.
Okay.
Well,
Right.
My reason for bringing this up was everything talked about heritage. And heritage to me, with the Tourism Development Council, means history or culture. And I think that's what we're talking about in the city with this ordinance. But my point is it has a broader need for what we're doing. And the
Yeah.
fact that we included stands leads to a function, not just of history.
And I think what the language is that here is kind of a compromise, because we went and talked about how, at one point, we were talking about how it should be distinct. You only look at, you should look at natural resource values independently of heritage status. And then we talked about it some more, and we wanted to bring that language back into the code and use it. And so that's kind of what this says today.
It's on 3.
God forbid that I would argue against natural resource values of trees, but what's worrying me here is if someone is now expected to judge individual trees or stands of trees based on their natural resource value, that implies you've got some criteria to do it. And I don't see
That's
any.
why, and that's also why we included, in addition to an arborist, an ecologist or a biologist or whatever you called it in the ordinance. That's why we worked hard to include that. So we weren't just looking at it from an arboriculture standpoint.
Yeah, and a lot of that hinges on the adequacy of the application and the need to request as much information at the beginning of the process as possible, because I don't think that happened, as Mr. Nacita said, with the Daniels application, and we want to avoid that in the future. So,
But now we're talking about a tree or a stand of trees that has some unique or unusually large natural resource contribution.
how about native habitat value?
Or just how about habitat value? How
Well,
about
habitat value, they all have habitat value. We're talking about like a prime example of a native intact habitat is really what we're talking about. So I don't know how you say that.
I'm just struggling with the criteria side of it, you know. I
Understood.
mean,
Well,
if
that-
you're talking about ones that are, whose value is so much more than most of the rest.
I think we felt that the terms horticultural or ecological encapsulated what you're trying to get to.
You did have, yes, good.
But if you'd like to add
Yeah, sometimes,
more.
yeah, every time you introduce a term, you have to define it. You know.
Yes, that's
And
exactly what's concerning me.
Exactly, so we've
Ecological.
added some
Not
good
the
terms,
concept.
and now we've got to define them.
Ecological significance is about as broad as you can get, in my mind. It encompasses, the habitat, the natural resource value. Yeah.
Are you suggesting then heritage or ecological significance?
Oh, I'm just looking at criterion 4.
Yes, which already says
That's why I know
Already says.
horticultural or
I'm looking at number 4
ecological
too.
significance, yeah.
Anyway,
Well, where I've been consistently coming from is I don't care about protecting individual trees if there isn't a value beyond history, all right? It's nice, but I'd like to see what we're doing here also be celebrating the biological life that's in that area. And assemblages do that. Now we've included those much better than individuals. And as long as we are celebrating biological value and also the heritage, which to me means history and culture, I think we're doing more than what the ordinance was originally intended. And by including stands, we are doing more than what the ordinance originally intended. So,
I have a suggestion, that instead of value, we put canopy,
do what now?
which contributes to Oregon City's heritage status and natural resource canopy. Or, because we want to be the tree city, so how do you work in being the tree canopy city?
Well, it is defined, by Friends of Trees and the Tree City people as a % coverage, which is canopy.
Right.
And natural resource, natural canopy, or?
Well, the canopy can include non-natural trees that are horticultural varieties that were planted. But it's all canopy.
I think we're kind of getting away from
yeah,
what this is. It's the heritage code, or
Right.
Well, we're broadening the
Well-
heritage definition.
I just want to point out that this is a small part of a very large code that does include other tree protection ordinances, and I feel like those tree protection ordinances, which do concentrate on larger resource needs and values, are the ones that we ought to concentrate on if we're going to foster that. But the point of making these amendments was just to celebrate heritage trees in a voluntary way, so that you could designate them and say, wow, look at that. And it was really as simple as that.
Yeah.
And I believe that the criteria that we've added helps to distinguish that. And I feel it still does include the possibility of assessing a tree's natural resource value as part of the criteria.
Well,
But
How about this?
I don't want to get sidetracked and start.
Mr. Chairman, the staff has done a great job in taking our previous ideas and putting them into some substance that we could be agreeable to, and then Shaw's added and others have added. I'd like to give a little more time on this for you to see what you can do. You know what we're trying to do here.
I do.
And if
Yeah.
there's a way to make it work, fine.
yeah.
Within the Natural Resource Overlay District, which is an overlay,
Yep.
that portion of the code is really, and then tree protection code section is another section that potentially we can use, but,
I have a
but,
suggestion.
yeah.
I guess one way to look at it is that the natural resource values are part of our heritage, and that's what we're trying to protect.
I have a suggestion.
Now, you can send me emails as well.
I will. I want to read it to the group, because this sentence, I kind of,
Okay. we
and I
got a
will
sentence.
send it to you. The tree or stand of trees has age, size, or species significance which contributes to Oregon City's ecological and historical heritage.
That sure meets it better, in my opinion. But
Excellent.
right. But you've done a good job, Pete. And I
Brilliant.
think we're just struggling with little details, but I think
Wow.
this is a lot better than it was.
This will be fun if we get to go through all of the different codes and, like,
Did you say fun?
Well, when you get stuff done.
Mr. Chairman, you have a person.
Yes.
I've got a question, just looking at where we are on the agenda, where we are on the clock.
Yeah, amen.
Is there a way we can distinguish
that's right. I
the
do.
rest of the agenda items that are time sensitive, and which ones are general information?
Right. Well, we have the tree list, and then we have two general information items, which
Yeah.
I can skip over.
I'm just, you know, if they're time sensitive.
Yeah, we are
I just
getting
wanna-
late. We are getting late.
all right.
Is it possible to add one last comment before we
Could,
leave this
certainly.
one? Back to the tree stand thing again. I'm not sure exactly where we left that. I heard some
The definition?
important ideas, and I'm, at least, it seems to me that it's still in some conflict and confusion. I mean, I'm looking here at subsequent sentences that refer to groupings of two or groupings of three, and then there's the idea of defining a stand as having some kind of continuous canopy, which made sense to me, frankly, but I don't know that we ever resolved that, did we? I mean, we talked about it, and then we just sort of left the idea, and I just wanted to add the thought here at the end that it seems important to me that stand, if we're going to use it at all in here, it has to have some meaning. I mean, it has to be defined in some way other than just two or more trees. I mean, if that's the way we're going to define it, it's kind of silly to even use the term, I think.
I like 3 or more.
But I don't think that solves it. I mean, you know,
No, it doesn't.
I mean, in my own mind, I'm just saying.
Why doesn't it solve it? If you have 2 or more or 3 or more, however you want to define it, then you've got the criteria up here.
Yes, but if it's two or more or three or more, that each of the two or three individually meets the criteria, and then you're just simply saying if you got 2 or 3 on the same piece of property, you can call them a stand.
Well,
that
important point. I think there needs to be some proximity or contiguity definition in the definition.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the one that's there is the only possibility. I kind of liked it
No.
myself, but I think there needs to be one. That's all I'm saying.
No, I agree.
If we don't like this one, I think it's kind of up to us to craft an alternative.
Why don't we work on that?
Amen.
Yeah. Yeah, think it through on your copious spare time, and if you can come up with an alternative or a phrase even that might help. And
I'm going to work on
Pete's heard several options already, and he can report those back to us.
I'm going to work on a definition of heritage tree,
Okay.
which I think will be better than the one here that will.
Just bear in mind that once it's designated, you've got a designated heritage tree stand, and that's a separate definition. Before it's designated, you've got a stand of trees that you need to have a definition for. So,
So I think one more rewrite, and
all right.
as far as the Blue Heron stuff, I can make a suggestion that you send us information, including the Metro report,
Okay.
and send that so that people can start digesting it ahead of
Yeah.
time, and
Yeah.
send that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Anything else that looks like it would be valid.
We're so not zipping through that.
I will also feel the same way about Metro's climate program here. I went through it. It has a lot of real technical stuff in it,
Oh, very.
which I think we need a little more time on that.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, we're in phase 2 of a 3-phase process. It will probably end in 2015 as far as adoption of a scenario by the Metro Council, which would then be enacted by each individual ordinance within the metro urban growth boundary. So it's going to be a lot of process and a lot of analysis. The goal is to get to a 20% below the 2005 carbon dioxide limit in the Portland metro area, which works out to 1.2 metric tons of CO2 per capita, which is what they're trying to get to. How they measure that?
What is it now, did you say?
Well, they believe that under current adopted land use plans and fleet management, they can get to a 1.3 metric tons per capita CO2 emissions, but they have a gap between that and where they want to get, which is 1.2. So a lot of that gap is dependent on funding of transportation system plans in the metro area. And that's kind of where the Metro Technical Advisory Committee meeting was. That was about last week, was which funding scenario generates, which funding for transportation system plans in the metro area gets to the goal. Obviously, the one that costs the most money gets to the goal the quickest, which is, fully funding the regional transportation plan in the metro area helps us get to our climate goals for CO2. There's another document in your packet which talks about the assumptions that they're making for consumer patterns. So they're making assumptions about what fuel economy light trucks and cars will have in 2035, what the replacement rate of a vehicle is, which is like 8 years. So these assumptions are things that they've been through in the phase 1 process, and they're kind of validating their assumptions now with the Technical Advisory Committee. And as they move forward with this process, we'll bring more information back to you. It is very detailed. Mm-hmm. Some of their biggest gains are to do with fleet management and improvements in the efficiency and emissions of fleets for large employers and governments. Anyway, that takes care of that.
Okay, let's move on to the street tree list and at least introduce yourself to the subject again.
Can I
Right.
do an event announcement before we?
What?
Event announcement related to the climate change.
Yeah. I jumped.
The Earth Day is coming up in April.
April
It'll be-
20th.
Well, there's a variety of things happening that week. I think it was actually originally the 22nd, if I remember right. But
20th is Thursday.
basically, there's at the John Inskeep Environmental Learning Center on Saturday, April 20th, looking pretty much from 10 to 11 o'clock a.m., looking to have kind of a local climate change discussion, kind of picturing 3 parts to that. We're limited by the space in the lakeside room to 25 individuals, so we're trying to get folks signed by advance. But I think what we're trying to do, just pretty much in an hour, is do kind of a brief overview of anticipated climate change impacts to the Northwest, so people can understand, what may be happening shorter term, longer term. What we'd like to do is formally request about maybe 15 minutes from Oregon City staff, just kind of talk about how in broad terms, the city's kind of looking at their role in addressing climate change, and then have like a half-hour discussion where participants could kind of scope out what they would like to see happen locally regarding climate change. And that could be through public sector, nonprofits, individual, with the idea of trying to get a little bit of momentum going for an ongoing kind of like subcommittee involvement. So that's pretty much the thing, but it'd be really helpful, I think, to have a city staff person there to answer some questions, just to provide the overview, because they could do it in a way that committee members probably couldn't.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Are there any questions about the event?
And what is the purpose? I mean, once it's done,
Well, the purpose of the event is trying to get some momentum and interest built
to do what?
to continue identifying, addressing climate change. I think act as a constituency for the city to kind of like bring up climate change topics at city council meetings.
Okay.
When other things come up, make sure the climate change angle is considered. But there isn't really a concentrated, durable, sustainable community investment interest organization, I think, addressing it.
And who is the organization that be doing this? Is this a group you're bringing together?
Well, this is the Climate Change Subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee.
Oh, okay. Of this committee?
Which is Bob's the chair.
Yeah, I'm the chair.
Oh, okay.
I-
Thank
I-
you.
I wanted
Now
to
I
ask-
get it. Now I get
I need
it.
somebody to cover my backside.
Thank you. Now I get it. All right. Sounds good. Sounds like a good deal.
Sounds good, Bob. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
are there any other questions? Thank you.
No.
Great. Yeah, I'll be happy to be there.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, did you want to go through individual tree issues now? or
Well, get an idea where we're at with that. And
Okay.
I don't think we have time to really discuss it because it's 20 to 10 already. We're past
Yeah.
Plus, there's two more announcements I'd like to make, too.
I spoke with Eric Carr before the meeting about these amendments, and he had two suggestions. One was to make one column, basically make a column which has whether you're a power line tree friendly or not, and that would help eliminate some of the redundancies. He was a little confused by some of the language that said with or without power lines, and so it was misleading. So I'm just going to take that language out and then put a yes or a no in the column, so people will know that, and that'll help consolidate the list even more.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're talking about taking out that whole last section of...
Yeah, today
Okay,
what you
that's
see
fine.
is there's a whole last section of reference trees for underneath the power lines, and those have been duplicated from the list in the beginning, but there's really no reason for that. So it just makes it simpler. We'll also add a column for whether it's a native tree. We can
That's
do
easy
that.
enough. There's only a few.
Yeah.
And that needs to be added to, and that's something that can happen over time here.
And that was basically it for Eric, but more importantly, there are some
How about-
additions that you wanted to add.
How about
so-
instead of adding another column, you just put an asterisk in front of it? So it's part
Well,
of
it's a spreadsheet, so it'll look like an asterisk, once it's formatted correctly, but, we just
Yeah.
want to, but we can do that.
I mean, within each of these things, it would be nice to know, are any of these natives?
Yeah, right, and then,
Some known.
yeah.
I have a variety of comments that I've made on my own edition of this, and
Okay.
I should just email them in. I don't want to discuss each one because it's
Perfect.
quite a few.
Yeah, just send me those.
I could give you one for an example.
Okay.
It's like a vine maple on there, which takes full sun just fine, except it grows as an extremely large bush without remedial pruning in full sun.
I gotcha.
But it can be used as a tree. It can be. So, and it's much less likely to fall over like it does in the woods.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but I pruned for over 10 years one that was about 12 feet high and 15 to 20 feet across in someone's, right in front of somebody's house. Would have been even wider without that, but that's just the way they grow in full sun. So
they sprout at the
yeah,
base
so
more.
it's a maintenance issue because you're going to have to prune it to make it into the tree you'd want as a street tree in a small strip.
Okay.
So, little things like that.
Following up on Shaw's concern about evergreens being a part of the street tree function, what was your thoughts? I mean, what were you?
I think that's would
Mountain
be
hemlock or
workable.
something?
Well, mountain hemlock would be a native one, at least native in the mountains here. Eastern hemlock is in between the size of that and the big native hemlock, western hemlock. And there's oriental species that are smaller. And there's a wide variety of evergreens, including some broadleaf evergreens, which have their own positive and negative points. There's a number of those that could be used, including some that are native in the mountains here, or Southern California.
Some of the things you just talked about, I believe, are also somewhat spreading in character.
Yeah, some of the trees on that list aren't really that good. Like I love Japanese snowbell, but it is a horizontal grower.
But if
I've seen them
that's a
30 feet
consideration,
across, and only 35 feet tall, and that's an ancient tree.
I guess my thinking was, following up on Shaw's interest, there's ceanothus, there's a number of other broadleafed and narrow-leafed evergreen that would provide year-round.
Well, the the Chinkapin that we have in the mountains is a really nice broadleaf evergreen with a smaller, very hard evergreen leaf.
So I'm wondering if we could help. I'd be willing to work on that with you, Brian, and Shaw, for that matter, to get that integration in this of evergreens that provide some value in a list that has almost no evergreens.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I think they're going to be in the new development areas, if they ever do develop, like Beaver Creek Road and South End, and areas where you have boulevard situations and green streets and larger planting areas, be perfect for the larger native species. And in fact, the Metro Green Streets list has really good guide for that kind of thing, which I used as a reference when we were adding in some of those larger trees. But the Metro Green Streets book is a very detailed book if someone wants to use that as a reference, and I think there's a way to do that. But
well, I'd be glad to work on some ideas and work with Brian and Shaw, for that matter, to get this component in there, because I think it's important.
Okay.
All right.
Great. So, anything else on this, or shall I talk about Willamette Falls?
I'm going to send you my comments so far, so you can do with them as you will.
Sure. Yep.
And
bring that back to you.
I've got them on my iPhone, but
yeah, let's talk about the Willamette Falls project.
Yeah, I think that would be good, and we can do some background work on the street tree list.
Mayor Neely has signed a letter here for the Natural Resources Committee that is very recent, and so the city has just put out a request for proposals. Since we're leading a public visioning framework and master plan process for the site with help from Metro and in partnership with the state and Clackamas County. And at this point, we're soliciting bids to develop a conceptual master plan for the property. So the public will be invited to shape the site in collaboration with all these partners. And then the vision's going to come out of this, which will facilitate future rezoning for the property. And in preparing part of the site for economic redevelopment and part for an outdoor destination. We're hoping that we'll create an opportunity to purchase the portion necessary to let visitors access the most important natural resource portions of the site and experience the falls. As you know, there's tremendous cultural and historical interpretation opportunities there and a potential to restore habitat. And what we're trying to do right now is to eliminate uncertainty with respect to the site. And so the city's done a variety of different assessments, geologic and environmental. There's, in the packet that was sent to the city commission last week, there's a Metro Phase 2 report, which is about 150 pages long, not including the 120-page lab reports. There are an addendum to it, but I haven't looked through it. Suffice to say that the number of environmental problems that they sampled was relatively minor and isolated. Because of the nature of the facility and the bedrock that it sits on. It's not like they found widespread evidence of things, which is great.
Now in the ocean.
And that's as much as I know about that.
Pete,
Yes.
I've got one question. Sometimes on golf courses they use gray water for irrigation.
Yeah.
And there's actually potential kind of like health concerns
Mm-hmm.
doing that. And well, I guess I'm wondering, and just hearing the presentation about the stormwater and talking about like bacteria levels, do we want tourists to the waterfalls inhaling a lot of the spray going over the waterfall? I'm just
Right.
thinking of what's
Well,
upstream of Oregon City.
I think that part of that comes out of the
Gas
master plan envisioning process. If that is
Make money renting
a serious concern in the public, then that issue comes to the forefront as part of the visioning process.
Well, the water
So,
skiing public,
yeah.
the boating public, all would have the same concerns you have. You might want to talk to Wilsonville about using the Willamette River as their water source now for 8 years successfully.
No, because I know like the windsurfers up in the gorge, they get some skin problems and things up there. So.
Yeah. So what we're really looking forward to is getting stakeholders involved in this process as early as possible. Once we've gotten bids, there's going to be a review body that includes, I think, about 18 members, some of whom are on the Heritage, Willamette Heritage. What's the name? The Heritage Area Coalition, and others as well. So they're going to be reviewing some of these bids. There's going to be a selection process, and the phases for that process are all on the website. It's kind of a tight timeline. The reason it's on a tight timeline is because, as you know, it's held by a trustee. It's in bankruptcy, and we can only count on the trustee holding the property until April 2014. And he could sell. As directed
Coming right
to by
up.
the bankruptcy court. Yeah. So,
What happens after that date?
well, we have signed we're about to sign an agreement with the trustee to participate in this process, and it would be through, I believe, April 2014.
Okay.
So that's but that has not been finalized yet. We're hoping to finalize that in the next few days.
So is the city, metro, et cetera, considering buying the property? Is that why you're, or could it
That's
be,
right now.
but it could be sold to someone else as well?
There
it sounds
are,
like.
well, if the bankruptcy, it could be sold to somebody else
After this waiting period.
after this waiting.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be until April.
So
The most
End of April
important thing at this point
2014.
is that all these partners work together in lockstep to just kind of get a process in place. Because right
Is it-
now, it's privately held. It's not like a master plan where the city can walk in and just do a master plan for the site. We have to have the trustee agree to this in order to get the vision
Yeah,
everybody wants.
I strongly suspect the trustee wants this to happen because he has no idea what that property is worth without it. It's not worth a whole lot.
Well,
And it's worth a lot more if it's defined and it's this zone and this can be done with it. That puts value on that property, and he wants
Yeah,
it
and
to
I
have
did
it
wa-
defined.
I did want to point out this brochure that you have, which is the Discover Willamette Falls brochure. So it's a brief description of the site. and history. And there are 4 shared values.
I don't have a packet because I wasn't here.
There are 4 shared values that the partners have agreed to. That includes public access, historic preservation and cultural interpretation, economic redevelopment, and habitat restoration. And these values are embodied in the agreement and will be a guiding set of factors for the master plan process. And so this is the brochure that's being distributed so widely right now. And
I don't think that's in the packet that I
Yeah,
picked
it
up
is.
from you.
It's
Is
one
it?
of these,
I can send one down.
Jerry,
one.
over there by the booklet you have,
Oh, okay.
there's a bunch
All
of
right.
papers, it's
Okay.
in there.
And if you have detailed questions about this, Christina Robertson Gardner is the project manager who's shepherding the RFP process and the proposal process.
Do we have a formal identified role in this whole thing?
At this point, we don't have a steering committee yet. You know, when we have the master plan process in place, the selected consultant will be responsible for assembling the steering committee, and the NRC will certainly have a role in there. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before we,
We had a couple of announcements.
yes, the, Brian and I conducted the first Lower Clackamas River Task Force, and I don't know whether Dr. Fred, did you get an invitation or not? Because we were emailing, he was emailing to everyone that
No,
we
I
asked.
didn't.
I
No.
thought I sent you one, but I may have
All right,
missed it.
well, we're sorry
Well,
about that, because we-
Unless I was out of the area for several weeks, so it's also possible I missed it.
all right, just to refresh the committee, we established a Lower Clackamas River Task Force as a subcommittee of this group, just like Bob, and I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were doing until you explained it again. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
So we have a tree committee, we have climate change or advocacy.
Lower Clackamas, yeah.
Okay, and now we have a Lower Clackamas River Task Force. 9 people showed up. It was a really good turnout. John Lewis came. That was excellent because John, as Public Works Director, really got behind helping us with some things. We agreed to meet again on April 24th. We had people from Gladstone there. We had people from Oregon City. Didn't have Westland, but I think they'll be there at the next meeting. And the basic thrust was to identify the major issues. And thanks to Richard, that presentation you did months ago for us, we used that to get people's focused attention on the legacy, the history of what's been going on in the river. We identified about 5 things. A bridge that's ready to collapse, which the city manager of this city and others have been working on trying to get that resolved, either get it stabilized or get rid of it. And it's unclear what's going to happen. There's some momentum moving forward maybe to try to do something with the bridge, the so-called trolley car bridge. The growth of a major rock bar has caused a lot of other things to occur. Clackamas Cove Spit is being eroded again heavily. We have a new trail on Gladstone side that's going away as we speak. Another 150 feet of distance, 10, 15 feet back, went away in the last 2 weeks. So the potential for putting a trail between Cross Park and Dahl Park, continuous to the mouth of the Willamette along the Clackamas, is going away. And then we have private property landowners that are losing their value of their land, and as they lose the value from land caving in, the 150-foot setback water resource overlay requirement moves back. Guess what? The potential for doing anything is going away. Then we have a boat ramp called Clackamas Park, which is barely usable anymore because of turbulence and so forth. So we felt, I think following your lead, Richard, though you weren't there, a holistic look is what we got to do. And John's thinking was, why don't we get the agencies together, a few of them that can get along with each other, and talk about what's possible and look at a more broad-based kind of approach. Representative Kennemer has offered to Bill Kennemer to involve his staff in reviewing and doing research to find out what could be done. But we feel that the bigger look is necessary. Our next meeting will be April 24th, Wednesday, at Water Resources Environment, the West Plant, which is the sewer plant meeting room. So that's kind of what happened in a nutshell.
I've got to add something to this, is that the Willamette Special Interest Partnership, which
Yes.
is a conglomeration of virtually every agency that has anything to do with natural area planning along the rivers has expanded the area they're covering to the lower Clackamas. They haven't defined how big the lower Clackamas is, but it's going to be close to the same area that we've been talking about. And they're wanting to look at potential for habitat enhancement in that area by reconnecting the river to its original or lost channels and so on. And so exactly how they're going to look at it, we don't know, but they're an organization that the city should be contacting and speaking with, because they've got grant money, they've got a lot of expertise, and a lot of clout, to say the least, because it's a huge, it's everybody, everybody that has to do with natural area management is in this special interest partnership. So it's a major thing. They've been working in the upper Willamette and not on the below the falls up until now, and they've just got going, had a meeting or two on the lower section of the Willamette, and it's associated streams like the Clackamas. So finding out what they're up to would be real important for the city, I think. So, and I have contact numbers and all that. I don't have them with me, but we can get the city in contact with them, because I think they need to, because they're an interested party, to say the least.
Good.
Okay.
Excuse me, it seems to me that there's, to use the word entity again, there's an entity missing from the efforts, and that would be the city of Oregon City and Gladstone in the county, in terms of a visioning process to see what they would like it to be like down there. What are the opportunities for down there? And there are a lot of issues to deal with down there, but what's the overall vision for that area?
That's exactly true.
And so it just seems to me that there's something missing there, and I think maybe that would be a discussion with Mr. Frazier, maybe.
That probably is a good idea. It was good to have John there because he represented the city. Gladstone's administrator wasn't able to be there, but citizens from Gladstone were, and they have a distinct vision of what they'd like to see.
There's been a lot of discussion and studies and permits and so forth that have been secured for that lower river over the last 12 years. And it seems to me that not much has been done down there, really. And so I think you need to identify the interest, by the community.
The interest and what is possible to do.
Yep.
And
I think part of that conversation is listening to the river so it can tell you what it's planning to do, and not try and recreate it, because it's going to do what it wants to do eventually. So the vision is going to be, how can we work with what the river's doing to create something workable?
Yeah.
Because I think trying to manage that river is impossible.
it'll have to be managed and remanaged.
Yeah,
in other words.
Just thinking in a jurisdictional sense, obviously Gladstone abuts Clackamas River, Oregon City abuts the Clackamas River, but the actual bed of the Clackamas, does that belong to the state?
State
Like
of
the
Oregon.
waters
United States
so
waters.
you have two local jurisdictions and the state in
Right.
a jurisdictional sense
And
responsible
the Corps of
for the area.
Engineers.
And the Army Corps has jurisdiction over that area, first half mile of the Clackamas and the Cove.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to look at the
Yeah.
jurisdictional
Well,
players.
that's why it's, all those people are in the special interest partnership, I believe.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying these people have to be talked with.
Yeah.
If you're going to get anything done, because they could decide, oh, we'll just let the river move over, and like it used to be, which is a fact. It used to be where this eroding land is, used to be river, and it was all filled in quite a long time ago.
No.
So is it more important to let the river do what it wants, or have this previously filled land available for development? Because you can't have both.
Yeah.
And, the river is recreating the island that was mined away for gravel, and the river is going around the island that's farming and eroding the banks back to where they were 150 years ago. So, but,
Public Works Director John Lewis would be the person that would inherit that mantle, I am assuming, just because of the budget and the means that they have to do work on their side of the river.
So, and the Army Corps did declare it navigable for the first half mile, and it's not anymore with that gravel bar there.
Right.
So that's yet another angle to look at,
Maybe
So
something
it's-
about the tide.
Well, the tide is why there's so much rocked in dump right there,
Stop.
It's the tide and
Well, if we could
the
just
backwater from the
control
Willamette,
Broaden our purview.
Yeah.
have gravity involved.
There is gravity.
Let's do a heritage.
One last thing I'd like
It's a mood heritage,
One last thing I'd like to ask tonight, and that was, Pete and I talked about this, Clackamas Cove is having some serious and/or terminal problems at this night, and this time, the development. And I'm not sure, the development's already been declared, the developers are no longer to be related to the city. But I had a question for Pete, and that was whether you'd been able to talk to Tony.
Yeah, I spoke to Tony Conkle and I spoke to Laura Turway. Tony and Laura both were involved in development reviews for the Cove over the last few years. The master plan for the Cove, which is the general development plan, which is a 20-year horizon and was last approved in 2007, I believe. So, the master plan is still valid. However, the detailed development plans only have a lifespan of 3 years and have subsequently expired. So any new on-the-ground development has to be resubmitted as a new detailed development plan in conformance with the overarching master plan. So
the question was,
yeah.
in light of the present developer group potential, well, not ending their relationship unless something changes, will this body and those of us that worked hard to negotiate some compromises to retain certain values, will they stay intact, or do we have to get involved again?
Any new land use application would go through the same process that it has previously. So the Urban Renewal Commission, if they are a part of the project, would be apprised of it, and then all the plans would need to be reviewed again by the NRC, by the Planning Commission, and by the City Commission. They just run their course.
We're just walking away from this? I'm just trying to understand.
Well, the disposition agreement that you guys saw, that I have not seen.
I have the letter here with me.
Okay,
If you'd
good.
like to see it.
Yeah, that is a agreement on what role the city will have as far as a public-private partnership, and what role we have in terms of both funding and development standards as well, because you can write just about anything into a development agreement, beyond the code. So, but it all needs to be redone.
Okay, thank you for doing that.
Sure. Yeah.
I just, for the record, I feel it's very unfortunate this has happened, because Richard, myself, Ryan, and others have worked on this thing to get compromise into the hopper. Developers are willing to do a lot of things that they weren't willing to do before.
Right. The
And
landscaping on the
start over or have to start over is very dismal.
Yeah.
I hope something can be worked out with them to re-involve them, so we don't have to
I do too.
go through all this again.
Yeah. Certainly, it's a unique site. It's got a lot of complications due to
Yes.
jurisdiction and natural habitat. But, yeah, I think what was resolved in the previous application would serve as a guide for future review, certainly. Those are permanent records.
Yeah, there was certainly some good proposals that, that we might want to keep or reuse in some way.
But, yeah,
Okay.
every part of it would be resubmitted. Sorry.
The way I look at this, I think, is that I think it should be looked at again, maybe differently, in terms of natural resource retention. And, maybe something better could be could occur out there.
We'll see.
Okay, let's,
Thank you.
I'm going to real quickly say that we still have a lot of the same agenda items for next time.
Yeah, is there,
And
Would you like to
the
speak
Blue
to that?
Heron would be something for us to look at also. So we've got easily another full meeting without really looking for new items.
Okay.
Because, I don't know, does anybody else have something they'd like to see on the agenda at this point?
Well, eventually the lighting ordinance, but
Yes.
I'd like to
agree.
work on it first and present like a much more complete thing.
That would be good.
Yeah,
Great.
but not next
I
time.
also wonder whether it's time for us to, one of our requirements is to meet with the planning commission or the city commission. I think it's time for us to
Correct.
seriously plan a meeting with the city commission to let them know how we think things are going and have them question us too. I
yeah,
don't know
you've got
what the sequence is.
a scheduled meeting with PrAC for a representative from the NRC to go initially and then organize a larger meeting with PrAC this year. So that's coming up here pretty soon.
Yeah.
And
That's the Parks Rec Advisory
that's the
Committee.
Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. In terms of meeting with the Planning Commission and City Commission, yeah, I think the next Planning Commission meeting, I'll talk to Tony about that. When is a good time to schedule that? And that would probably be a work session or there's also opportunity for public comment at all of the meetings, so I think as an advisory group, you would get 15 minutes if you wanted to give reports, and it would be a fairly informal back and forth, and City Commission's pretty good about that. That's an opportunity, too.
As a future agenda item, would you just send us out the code that deals with the public parks and trees on, you know, the other aspect of the tree ordinance that you said?
Sure,
Might
yeah. Yep, okay.
Yeah,
You know-
that would be good. Okay.
Yeah. Will do. Okay.
Okay. Any
Motion
more?
to adjourn? Are we adjourned?
I will so move that we adjourn.
Yeah,
Let's
there
go.
you go. Okay,
Wonderful.
good.
You want to
Okay.
come to that?